before we look at that again. Are you look at them today? Today, sir? Yes, you're right. You are right. This house is in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, September 13th, 2022 to be deferred. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Announcements by Your Honour the Speaker.
Message from
Her Excellency the President.
Message from Her Excellency the President. 16th of September 2022. Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform the Honourable the House of Assembly that with the approval of the Honourable Acting Prime Minister, I shall be on duty leave from the 16th of September to 23rd of September 2022. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the office of President during my absence. As the Honourable the House of Assembly will not be meeting prior to the start of the duty leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you, therefore, please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honourable the House of Assembly when next it meets. Yours faithfully, President. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm commanded to lay the audit report and audited financial statements of the Student Revolving Loan Fund for the year ended March 31st, 2021, and also to lay, Mr. Speaker, the Sovereign Counter Guarantee Contract number 5568 OCBA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank program to support environmental and economic development in Barbados, as well as the Sovereign Counter Guarantee Contract between the Government of Barbados and the Nature Conservancy program to support environmental and economic development in Barbados.
Private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 5. In the name of the Honourable Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Brighton in the parish of St. George in this island for housing development.
Honourable member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Blessed good morning to everyone. I rise in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, to lead off this debate with respect to the vesting of a resolution before the House to vest some 2.943 hectares and we know acres, which is 7.2 acres of land, at Brighton and St. George in the National Housing Corporation for the purpose, the public purpose of housing development. And Mr. Speaker, you know, we as a government, we have been faced with tremendous challenges over the last 3-4 years, well, since we came to office. But I'm mentioning the last 3 years with respect to the Hurricane Elsa, the last 2 years with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic, with respect to the freak storm. And Mr. Speaker, these can be considered a set of destabilizers, challenges that impacted our society in a negative way. And having been faced with challenges in 2018 when we came to office to restructure our debt and many other challenges, myriad of challenges. And Mr. Speaker, I am very cautious in how I introduce this debate because over the last few weeks and few months, we have seen a number of persons who, for want of a better word, naysayers and persons who want to oppose government, even when we are doing justice to our people and even when we are doing good things in this country and things that persons, whether in opposition or in government, should emulate and should give credit where credit is due. I remember when this said government, most of the members in here, we were in opposition. We never criticized for criticizing's sake. We spent most of our days and our time thinking and saying to ourselves, led by two opposition leaders, firstly our late Owen Seymour Arthur, and our current Prime Minister. We spent most of our days and our time not criticizing, but saying to ourselves, if we were the government of the day, what are some of the things we would do differently? And what are some of the things that we believe this government should be doing? And when we stood from that side and we spoke, well, not too often because the Parliament never met that often. So when we got the opportunity to come into these chambers and we spoke, we never got up and tried to tear down individuals. We spoke on policy issues, and we spoke on things that we believe the public of Barbados thought were important, because we rubbed shoulders day in and day out, with the people of this country to understand what they wanted and what are some of the measures and the policy initiatives that the government of the day should be putting in place. But they didn't listen to the people. We came to office and we continue to listen. And I'm being cautious because I start there, and I will get into the essence of housing and lands because they're both linked. They're all interrelated, they're intertwined, what I'm speaking about. We keep hearing, here or late, by an opposition, and they have to oppose, and they're opposing for opposing's sake. They have a phrase, out of control, that they're using to describe this government. But I say to you this morning, this government is in control of our destiny and in control of the people's destiny. But I want to go back to 2018 when we came to office. If we want to talk about out of control, let's talk about out of control. We came to office with a debt to GDP ratio of 176.3%. 176.3%. The debt was that percentage of GDP. Within a very short time frame, within less than a year, and currently as I speak to you now, our debt to GDP is 124.4. So if you want to talk about out of control, let's talk about out of control. What was out of control? Our debt position. And when we came to office, our debt advisors went through the debt data. This government hired advisors to go through the debt data with great details, including what the SOEs owed to people. And then the government issued what they call the details on the debt data in a prospectus during the debt restructuring exercise. The last administration, talking about out of control, never knew what the debt profile of their government or this country was at the time. And we had to do that. We discovered then that government had a raise of $1.9 billion owed to people. Owed to people. And they have the tenacity, the audacity, the temerity to say that this government is out of control. Let me talk about out of control briefly. It all links to housing and infrastructure. We couldn't pick up garbage on our streets. Prior to 2018, we had no garbage trucks. You want to talk about out of control? Let's really have a discussion about out of control. We had no garbage trucks. We came into office and we bought garbage trucks, beautiful garbage trucks. Do you hear now about any issues of garbage not being collected in this country? Member for the city, you had your woes. You hearing any garbage not being collected? Member for St. Andrew, you hearing about any garbage not being collected in this country? Member for St. Michael West, you hearing about any garbage not being collected in this country? But we ain't finished there, you know. we talk about out of control, go to the South Coast. We had sewage running in our streets. The member for St. James Central used a term that I don't want to use in this house, this chamber.
I can't be using this here.
I can't use it here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He spoke about persons swimming in it. On the South Coast, they were swimming in it. You want to talk about out of control? That was a government out of control. But we ain't finished there. Transportation wars in this country. No buses in this country. People can get to work. School children can get to school. You want to talk about out of control? Let's begin to talk about out of control. That was a government out of control. This government brought it back into control. Let's talk about out of control. Our students at university had to drop out. They were out of control. They couldn't pay their way. They had to drop out of university. You want to talk about out of control? That is what out of control is. We brought stability and control back to this country when we came to office. Our university students could not afford to pay the tuition fees. When the guys over here back then climb the ladder and then kick it down and say to them, if you want to get there however you can. That is out of control. You want to talk about out of control? They were out of control when they built houses in St. Philip, Carpenter's Glade, just above the prison. And they stood for 10 years, empty. Vines growing in the houses, unoccupied. You want to talk about out of control? That was a government out of control. The housing issues in this country were out of control. People could not afford a house in this country. You want to talk about out of control? That is out of control. And I start there, Mr. Speaker. I can go on and on. I can talk about the welfare system that was out of control. Thanks to the member for St. Thomas, she brought it back into control. Thanks to the member for St. Michael's South now, he has brought it back into control. Thanks to the member for the city, they have brought it back into control. We pumped some $5 million into the welfare. First thing we did when we came into office. And I said Sunday at a branch meeting, I want to thank the member for St. Thomas, and I thank the member for the city, and I thank his minister, the member for St. Michael's South, because the people in St. George, this resolution we are now discussing lands, the people in St. George said to me, as I walked through St. George, we are now getting a good response from the welfare division in this country. And you want to talk about out of control? You know, I came here in control. Because if I continue to speak like this, I might get out of control, and I don't want to get out of control. So I will stay in control and hold the steering wheel, right? Because at the end of the day, persons can speak as an opposition. They can mount platforms where only 100 persons will attend. When we mount a platform, no 100 people don't come, man. We got thousands. Especially when they're hearing our young members speaking, you know, and even talking about the veterans, like my friend here next to me, the member for St. James Central, and even putting him in the equation. I'm talking about the young members when they hear them speaking. I brought persons out of their houses on Sunday when the member for St. Michael, South Central, addressed my people in St. George, and they said they have never heard such a more organized and intellectual and detailed speech that broke things down in simple terms for them. And they compared her to someone else. I don't like to raise the dead, so I ain't even going there. Somebody to call Sarah Palin. I don't want to go there. I want to hold the steering wheel, and I want to stay in control this morning, because these are very serious issues we have to debate. So I can hold the steering wheel and don't get out of control. Don't let the car get out of control. But, Mr. Speaker, our housing stock was certainly out of control. In the last administration, ordinary Barbadians could not afford houses. we came in and we restructured our debt. And through it all, the economic turmoil that we have faced, whether it's the war between Russia and Ukraine, whether it is the COVID-19 pandemic, we were still able to restructure our debt. And if there's one thing you must take from here this morning, the people who are listening, that we were able to bring our debt under control. We were able to stop a devaluation. When the supermarket owners, I go into the supermarket and they tell me they can't get foreign exchange to bring in goods. The member for business now, he knows that very well. When I was the Minister of Commerce, a supermarket owner said to me, "Thank God for you all for rescuing us. Because prior to you coming to office," and he told me this in 2018, he said, "Prior to you coming to office, I couldn't get any foreign exchange from the central bank to bring in anything. I was struggling. Our import cover was at 4 weeks. That was out of control. We brought it back into control. I can't even tell you how much it is now because it's so high. 30-somebody weeks of import cover. That is in control. 4 weeks was out of control. Printing money at the central bank was out of control. That was out of control. So, you know, I am sorry that we couldn't mount a platform, but we don't need to because we're in control. So we don't need to respond out there to the foolishness. Let them talk, let them talk, let them criticize. We're in control of our destiny, and we're looking after the people of this country in several ways that I will speak about now. So I spoke about the economy, but the development of the housing sector has been one of the major focus of this government since coming to office, not only now, but prior to coming to office, since coming to office. Not only for the point of view of stimulating the economy and providing jobs, which is critical. I will speak to that. Let me make a note because I have to speak to that. 400 jobs to small businessmen in this country. I will speak to that later. But we have been pursuing policies targeted at stimulating the economic activity, as well as providing support to vulnerable groups in this country. So our housing policy not only catered to stimulating economic activity, but it caters to addressing some of the challenges among our vulnerable groups, such that recently the cabinet of this country decided, and I want to thank the Prime Minister and I want to thank my cabinet colleagues, that 10% of our housing stock that we are building must go to persons with disability. 10% of the housing stock that we will build in this country, and we have started, and you will hear today where we have started, will go to persons with disability. And that is addressing the vulnerable groups, persons with disability. We know very well they can't climb stairs. Some can climb stairs depending on the type of disability you have. But some of them can't climb stairs. So we have to make sure that when we build, we accommodate those persons, whether it is visually impaired, whatever, whether you're wheelchair bound. They're citizens of this country who are adding value as well to the development of this country, and they must be treated the same way as any other person. And that is why our housing stock has to cater to them. So I said before that the development of the housing policy will stimulate economic activity. It has started already. And we are also catering to all groupings, including those that are vulnerable, including persons with disability. And we have also focused on identifying various income groups. We know houses were built in this country, and we know under the last administration. And we know persons earning under $2,000 net income a month. And even persons earning $2,500 net income a month could not afford those houses that I refer to at Carpenter's Glade, that they're allowed to run to ruins, that we then had to come to office and address. And we have taken those houses up there and we have allocated them to single mothers. You can imagine that? We have allocated those houses at Carpenter's Glade to single mothers. We have also given the opportunity to persons who are earning less than $2,500 net. You can see those persons who have the houses up there in Carpenter's Glade. So we have rebuilt, remodeled the stock, re-engineered it, refurbished it, so persons can live at Carpenter's Glade. It's not a perfect situation, because I visited last month, and I see there's still some work we have to do as a Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, as well as National Housing, the state-owned enterprise, to allow persons to live in more comfort. Because some of these houses, as they begin to occupy the houses, they begin to see defects. So certain things are what I call behind-the-scene defects. We use that term sometimes, because you can't see them up front, but when you begin to occupy and then showers of blessing come upon us, then we tend to see the leaks. High winds, then we tend to see some of the challenges. So what you will put together and you will paint up and you will say is habitable for human use. Then when you see some of the adverse weather conditions come upon you, then you see the challenges presenting themselves. And we recognize that. And the Prime Minister, she recognizes that too. And she has asked us to address it in a meaningful way. But persons earning $2,000 net and $2,500 net a month could not afford housing in this country's under the last administration. Well, you had a housing stock sitting down unoccupied. And Mr. Speaker, what we have done, we have categorized, we have created sectors, and we have looked at the various sectors and how we can build out the housing stock to support the various income categories. That is why we have categorized persons, building homes for persons earning under $2,000 net income. We have categorized persons earning between $2,000 to $5,000, building houses for them as well. And we have also looked at persons above what we call the premium, and we have allocated. So every category, every demographic, we have covered in terms of how we are going to build up the housing stock. Mr. Speaker, we came to office with a problem of overcrowding in the housing districts, our 49 housing estates that we have. And this has become exacerbated as a result of the unauthorized extension of the units. And you gotta understand that persons, we are a family-oriented country where we don't want to see our aunts and our grandchildren and our children on the road. So persons extend. But while extending, seeking to accommodate their growing families, and this included adult children who now have families of their own, but lack the resources to own a home. That was the major problem across the 49 estates that we found. And it placed additional pressure on the services like the sewer system and the electrical services. So when you have occupancy, and this is real, we are not trying to degrade anyone. When you have occupancy of 12 persons in a house and they're using one latrine, one toilet, one-face basin, and they live comfortable. But at the end of the day, it puts pressure on the sewer system. And we don't want to be out of control and have any sewers running in our streets like we have seen back then. So we have invested into our sewer system. We have done some sewer system upgrade across the estates to the tune of $8.819 million we have spent on 140 systems thus far across the 49 housing estates to arrest some of these challenges. And I know up to yesterday, the member for St. Andrew, because of the rains we have, he was addressing a similar issue with sewage as a result. And these are some of the things that you will see, like I said, when you get heavy rainfall. We are committed as a government to addressing this situation by releasing and removing the high density within certain housing estates. So that is why resolutions such as this one, even though it is at Brighton, where we acquiring some 7.2 acres of land and investing it in national housing for the purpose of housing development. That is the reason why we have engaged in the 10,000 housing project initiative, what we call the silent housing revolution. But in our quest to build these houses, we have to acquire land. And the Land Acquisition Act is critical, as you can see, Land Acquisition and Disposal Act, whereby we are acquiring these lands and we are investing in these lands in the National Housing Corporation. This 7.2 acres will give us some 42 housing units. And I've asked the planner, the designer, to relook the density, but it is a private partnership, joint venture between National Housing and a private entity, whereby National Housing will provide the land and the private developer will do all the necessary infrastructure works, the road works, put in his water, and then he will construct the houses. That is the joint venture model that we have presently in our system, and it is working. Let's look at Atlantic Breeze. We are building over 300 houses at Atlantic Breeze in a joint venture partnership, and that is premium persons earning above $5,000 net. We're building 300 houses. We have started. By the end of this year, 100 houses will be built at Atlantic Breeze. So that is the land issue there. The government acquired the land, vested it in NHC, and NHC entered into a joint venture partnership with a private developer to build those 300 houses over a 3-year period. 100 houses every year. This is a government that is in control of its destiny and its people's destiny. We're in control of our housing plan. Everything imperfect. You will hear me speak on it shortly, some of our challenges. It's not perfect. But Mr. Speaker, this initiative, which aims to provide the 10,000 housing solutions to Barbadians over the next 5 years, is being pursued jointly between private and public sectors. And the Prime Minister, in giving her budget speech of March 2020, had targeted having approximately 1,200 housing solutions in the first year. And, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Housing and Lands, though, we have projected just over the 1,000. And I wouldn't split here as over 12 or 14 houses. But we need to achieve our targets. We set targets as a government. Similar to how we arrested our debt profile. We came in and we went through our debt. We hired debt advisors to determine what debt we owe to persons. 1.9 billion we paid out to persons, to people in this country and abroad. We recognize that we have to do similar planning, projections, setting KPI targets in housing. And the Prime Minister's target of 1,200. And I will speak to it now because we have a number of projects going on, and I will mention just a few. I didn't plan to get into any big housing matters in terms of the number of houses we have built thus far and Joe Villa and that, but I will mention just a few. Allen's Court, that's on White Park Road. Come the end of October, we will have 5 quadruplex units built, and that will house 20 persons right to own units in this country to address some of the challenges in the urban corridor. The member for the city, he just walked in and he's smiling. The member for St. Michael West, he's also smiling. These are the MPs in the urban corridor. They will smile because come the end of October, we're in the process of completing. I heard the member for the city told me he passed because he goes there more than me. More than I do. I was there this weekend. And I know the paint is on. He told me the paint is on. And I said, yes, he is truly checking in the city. And the member for St. Michael West, he called me up to yesterday. So, Mr. Speaker, those 20 units will be ready. And within those 20 units, we are sticking to our policy initiative that we enunciated as a cabinet. 10% of those houses will be allocated to persons with disability, Mr. Speaker. So 10% of 20, that's 2. But nonetheless, every single housing development that we build in this country on the National Housing Corporation and even some of the joint ventures with private entities, we will be allocating for persons with disability. But I go down to Eden Lodge, where right after we leave Allen's Court, we will journey to Eden Lodge. We have the lands there. We don't need to vest these lands in National Housing. National Housing has the lands. And we will build some more quads. They won't be as extensive as 5 quads. I think we can get 3 quads there. That will house 12 persons. And again, persons with disability. And those will be rent to own. We have to address housing in the urban corridor in a major way. I will come to other areas because I am speaking now primarily in the urban corridor because of the challenges we face. And I said this on the floor of Parliament the last time I spoke on a housing resolution. We have density challenges within the urban corridor, and we have to address it. So we have to remove the number of persons to take the strain off of the services that we provide in the 49 housing estate and to address some of the challenges with housing in the urban corridor. Mason Hall Street, Exmouth, these are areas that we have land, National Housing Corporation at Exmouth on Spring Garden. And I heard the member for St. Michael South Central said on Sunday that she is hoping that we still do high-rise building in this country. And I smile because the plan is to have some high-rise at Exmouth in the constituency of St. Michael Northwest. That's the member for St. Michael Northwest area. And that is supposed to address some of the challenges within the St. Michael area. And, Mr. Speaker, earlier in this year, we came to this chamber and acquired some 7,021 square meters of land. at Sergeant Village in Christchurch. We vested it in National Housing Corporation. And we have started building some 11 houses. The east-west houses, the light gear steel houses will go there at Sergeant Village. That's the request that was made, and it has been accepted. The design work has finished. Tongue and Country Planning and Development has approved it, and work has started there. So, Mr. Speaker, this will provide another 10 to 12 houses at Sergeant's. It's a small plot, but nonetheless. Another 6 sites, Mr. Speaker, in addition to Brighton, and I will get to Brighton in the end, but I just want to take you through the process because this, remember, my theme, this is a government in control of its destiny. We are in control of our destiny, and we are doing things to support every single class in this country. We are not out of control. I spoke about out of control just now, and I keep referencing it. Another 6 sites have received planning approval, and these are the 6 sites that have received planning approval. Clifton in St. Philip, that's 9 lots. Coconut Hall in St. Lucie, member for St. Lucie, we are now getting ready to construct the road there, and work has started there. That's another 22 lots. Then we go to River Crescent, where we will be building some 62 houses. And River Crescent, the infrastructure work has been completed. And I want to thank the private sector company who went in there and worked tirelessly day in, day out, and night to have this site ready for houses in this country. Grisette's Great House, another 3 quads we will be building, 12 houses. And these are some sites that are ready. Branchbury East, we have some 13 lots, and the most calls that I receive, and I see the member glancing, the member for St. Joseph glancing, the most calls I receive about housing, those calls are from the member for St. Joseph. Some 13 lots at Branchbury East. Ginger Works. Concordia North in St. Philip. Presently, work has started there to do the necessary infrastructure on the land so we can build some 144 lots, 144 houses there. And when I add that to what we are doing at Hope Inc., at Vesper Gardens, 164, at Pool North, 201, at Colleton, another 90-something lots. This year, we are on course to achieve our targets. So, Mr. Speaker, but we are not finished, because one of the housing estates that has tremendous challenges, or a few of them, reside in the area of St. Michael's Southeast. And the good news is, to the member for St. Michael's Southeast, we have just signed the conveyance. We have developed some 40 acres of land in St. Michael's Southeast at Lower Burney. We have signed the conveyance for some 40 acres of land, where 280 of those lots, houses will be built between NHC and the commercial state-owned enterprise called Hope Inc. And the other half of that, the other 20 acres, will be a joint venture partnership between a private entity and National Housing Corporation. So that is what we call Planning Gains land, and then we go to Branchbury again on the western side of Branchbury, where we have some other Planning Gains land. So, Mr. Speaker, as I stand here and I speak on this resolution, we clearly see that this government is focused, and it's not all talk, because we have started infrastructure works at most of these sites. Then we are going to Allen View. I've started a discussion on Allen View in St. Thomas to address some of the challenges that we face over the years from the last administration to make those residents comfortable, and that will require some relocation. And we have the land identified, and that is being addressed as I speak to you. That will not come in the year 2020, 2023. But plans have started, and hopefully within the next year, year and a half, we should see some progress in St. Thomas with respect to the Allen View residents. So the member for St. Thomas she hearing talk, but she wants to see action. And I know that is what she wants to see, because she heard talk from the last administration that was out of control and did nothing for her. But like I said, member for St. Thomas, this is a government that is in control, and we will certainly address that long-standing issue that continues to annoy those residents of Allen View that are situated in that nice environment of the Cave of Barbados. But Mr. Speaker, you know, when you speak to persons in this country, nearly everyone, they're now saying they don't want a piece of the rock. They're now saying they want a home. And it is our duty as a government. We may not be able to give every single person a home. But every 5 years, as we recycle policies and we look to be more innovative and creative with our housing solutions and our designs, I am certain that once the people of Barbados give us the opportunity and the time, we will bring tremendous respectability to the housing stock in this country. We will ensure that families are able to leave something for their children. Because when you listen to J.F. Kennedy, and I said so on the floor of this honorable chamber before, that a house is a central organizing unit in every single destination, whether it's first world, it is developing. And JFK said that from the standpoint, and he used references, that is where you pay taxes, that is where you vote, that is where you educate your children when they come from school or before they go to school. They only spend a certain amount of time at school. But after that, they have to do their homework. And that is why Hurricane Elsa and the freak storm impacted our citizens in a major way, whereby some of our young children, houses were without electricity even before Hurricane Elsa. But we were able, and we are, and I'll speak briefly to that, bringing some respectability to these 1,796 persons that have been affected by Hurricane Elsa. And Mr. Speaker, let me go there briefly, because we've been hearing about all talk and no action coming from certain quarters. But I started to set the record straight on Sunday, and I'm going to go further into it today. Because when you as a government can decide to rebuild 1,796 houses, to bring back respectability to residents and the housing stock as a result of the effects of Hurricane Elsa and the freak storm, that is a government that cares. And let me just bring it so I can see, because the eyesight is not as powerful as when I was 30 years. That's why I don't play cricket now. And I only manage and I watch. But I'm being told that I have to play a game within the next few weeks. And I will certainly do a little practicing, and I will bowl, but I will not bat. And I will strategize on the team that I'm being told that I have responsibility for. So I will strategize, but I will not bat. because I can hardly see the ball now. But nonetheless, I can't open no more. Member for, member for St. Michael, for St. James Central. But we provided some 213. We provided material. 1,796 houses were impacted. That's the count coming from the DEM. We worked in collaboration with various ministries. The DEM, Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Ministry of Agriculture. But that's the number. When we finalized everything at the end of December last year, that was the final count. 1,796 houses. We give, as a government, we provided material to 213 of those persons. That material affected some repairs to these 230 houses. We entered a partnership with East West to provide light gauge steel homes to 37 of those persons who have been affected. So the total repairs that have been allocated to the three agencies of National Housing, the Urban Development Commission, and the Rural Development Commission were 1,496 houses allocated to those three agencies. The progress thus far. Between structures that have been finished, they're close to 600, and structures that are currently in progress, that brings a total of 1,091 out of 1,496. That's about 74%, if you do the math, of houses that are in progress, work in progress, and they have been repaired and rebuilt by local contractors in this country. We have engaged, as a government, 420 local contractors to rebuild these houses. 420 we have engaged. The Minister of Small Business continues to advocate for that sector. And we have we've rebuilt and repaired and started, and we will finish before the year's end, some 73% of these houses. But we have still to mobilize another 15 to 20%, roughly around 220 houses, you can do the math, out of the 1,496. So those persons who are listening and who on the call input program, you know, when you undertake such a project like this, and we are going through a restructuring effort as a government, and we are battling with COVID-19, we are battling with Russia and Ukraine, and persons walking around and believing that we have a washpan of money sitting down. Which country you know now has a washpan of money? You can tell me in Belgian parlance. Tell me the country that has a washpan of money sitting down. But the government, though, we have invested heavily in this project because we want to bring respectability to our average citizens. We want to make sure that every single person who was impacted, you know, some persons look at me and said, but you all taking on such a task, that is a mammoth task, you sure you can get it done? It is indeed a mammoth task. Persons would get on the calling program and say, we haven't finished these houses and we started every since. But let it do research. On average, it takes 14 months to rebuild after a hurricane. Do your research and see. And let's count from July 21st. The hurricane struck us on the 2nd of July, 2021. Let's say getting that list finished probably took another 2 months. Cabinet approval, I don't have it in front of me when, but let's count from, if you want, let's count from the 1st of September, 2021 to September 2022. That's what, 12 months, right? That's 12 months. It takes, on average, 14 months in the first world to rebuild from a hurricane. We are doing an exceptional job as a government in seeking to bring back some respectability to the citizens of our country. So when they get on brass tacks and they talk about, yes, there are challenges, and like I said before, if I stand here today and I say to you that every time I want to pay a contractor, I get the money, I would be lying. We have to understand the situation that this government faces right now. It is not the usual operations. It is not like back then when they had a lot of money around the place and they didn't know what to do with it, so it was corruption on top of corruption. That was a government out of control. That was a government out of control. The corruption that occurred because they had the funds and they run it down till they have 4 weeks of import cover. They were not monitoring their debt. And I'm here to tell a story as I speak on housing. I ain't just going to get up and talk about lands at Brighton. I ain't even talk about St. George yet. We have a story to tell the people of this country. We have a story to tell the people of this country as it relates to housing. So that Low Bernie, the 40 acres coming next year, going to help the Deputy Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Southeast, and the member for St. Michael East. He complains that he only gets 6. My good friend for St. Michael East. Mr. Speaker, he will get more. He was neglected. All of us, we were neglected by the last administration. And this government, when the Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast allocates, she allocates fairly. And, let me pause and go back briefly. I don't want to lose track. But the program, the member for the city, the Adopt a Family program. That program that he was responsible for, some 1,628 persons were impacted across this country, right? And when I talk about fair allocations, I think it's about a 3.3% that was spread across every single constituency in this country. It was allocated fairly. That when I calculated my 200 and something persons, I think it was jointly in St. George persons that were impacted by that $600 program. We were in control because we recognized with the challenges we had to put bread on people's table, that vulnerable and that low income group category. Member for the city, you did a wonderful job. Under the circumstances, it was a tough challenge because you received calls day in, day out. And even persons who we may say were not worthy. That's why this government, we don't discriminate. Some of us sat down and we would say, persons who criticize this government, still criticize this government on the calling programs, dare to receive. And they're still cursing the government daily, day in, day out. They receive. Because that's the government. When we are the government of the day, we don't see blue, white, black, yellow, BD, NDP, ZP. We see the people. And despite you have the confidence, therefore, when we have addressed you in a positive light, you can go on the calling program and curse us. We don't hold it against you. We understand what is happening in this country. You might be paid to do it too. You might be paid to do it too. Who pays the piper? Mr. Speaker, this is not just a lands debate. This is a policy debate. As we seek to bring respectability, we continue to bring respectability to a key sector in this country. One of the greatest things that happened when we saw it fit in our quest, in our bid to become 100% renewable energy could come plant by 2030, one of our goals. To place photovoltaic systems on our housing stock. One of the innovations and one of the revelations by this government. And what that does is to reduce the cost of housing to the average man. And presently, I want to thank the state-owned commercial entity, Ho Inc., who started at Vesper Gardens, where they're building 160 houses. And we have photovoltaics, 10 kilowatt systems on these houses that will reduce your mortgage by between 32 and 39%. That is what it will do. So persons who could not afford a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom wall house before, they can afford it now. And their mortgage rate will be less than $1,000. And the 2-bedroom mortgage rate, as a result of renewable energy, the 10 kilowatt systems that be in place on these houses, their mortgage rate will be less than $750. This government is in control. We have innovators, persons we work with, and we don't do it all by ourselves. We had persons we call upon. That's the nature of the beast. They were out of control. They didn't see it fit to even call on persons to advise them. And I keep hearing the Prime Minister say to us, she always say, I may be a lawyer. I don't advise myself in the government. She brings persons to advise her. You don't advise yourself. You bring people to advise you. Right, member for St. Michael, for St. James Central, member for St. Michael Southeast? You don't advise yourself. You often bring in, because you are so embroiled in policy that you need to have a second look, someone to come who are outside of the forest. You know, when you're inside the forest, and my good friend for the city, he can relate to this. When you're inside the forest, you can't see all the trees. Can't see all the trees. And that's a phrase you use. I heard you use that phrase on a call-in program once. Yeah, you wouldn't let me in. I wanted to come in to discuss a matter and you wouldn't let me in. But nonetheless, that's all right. But Mr. Speaker, you know, that's a revelation. That's an innovation. You know, so that when we talk about going green, this government, we are battling on all fronts to ensure we are pushing several frontiers, whether it's in housing, it's in energy, whether it's in water works. You know, and I mentioned out of control, and I forgot to mention water. You know, we had tremendous water wars between 2008 and 2018. Persons were running with tanks and installing tanks all over Barbados and buying bottled water to pour in tanks. I never saw anything like this yet. Are we doing that now, member for St. Michael East? We ain't doing that now. So who out of control? You know, these things we have to speak about and let the public know what is happening in this country. Who were out of control. And I keep hearing people saying that the young people don't want to hear about back then. But you know, some of the best stories that guided me as a young boy were the stories from my grandfather and those elderly men as I walked the streets of Allerton and surrounding districts. They were able to tell us, and listening to Mr. Jordan, the member for St. Peter's dad, when I journeyed from that institution in the north, I would spend time with him, talking with him, not knowing that I would be sitting with his son today in a cabinet and a parliament, you know, advising policy and trying to do the best for the citizens of this country. Men like Mr. Jordan, those guys in Ellerton, my grandfather, the late Stephen Llewellyn Sutherland, give me stories. And why I'm going there, because I say it to the young people, you have to know where you're coming from, create the path to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes that were made back then. As we develop, there's innovation, there's creativity, things are changing. but you still have to understand what happened back in 2008, in 2010, in 2013. You still have to understand that if we had installed a plasma gasification plant at Vaucluse, what the price of your light bill will be today. That was a government out of control. The Lord rest the man in the grave. That was a government out of control. A plasma gasification plant that would have seen electricity bills skyrocketing. That's what they wanted to do. The Lord rest in the grave. We don't talk about it then. I talk about a policy initiative by the last government. That was the government out of control, and they have the audacity to mount a platform with 100 people on Sunday. Only 100, man. Somebody said down through they had 60. And you talking about a government out of control, this government out of control. I listed all the things, and I hope Barbados is listening to understand what out of control mainly means. That's out of control. Building a plasma gasification plant. And we came in here, and I sat where the member for St. George North was sitting, is sitting now. With the member for St. Michael Southeast, who sat where the member for St. Lucie is sitting now. We were the two youngest members at the time, tutored by the member for St. Thomas and the member for St. James Central. And we sat, we debated, and we begged, we plead, we told the then Prime Minister, you will commit a sin if you put a plasma gasification plant in Vaucluse in St. Thomas. We ain't accustomed to that technology. Those temperatures were outrageous. We were wondering how they were going to get those vessels out the port, the size of the plant, the diameters on the roads of Barbados, how they were going to install it. But it was about the largesse. They were out of control. That was what it was about, the largesse. Greed was out of control, member. Thank you. That was the problem. So when they could mount a platform and talk about out of control, when we are debating a key resolution to vest lands so we can help our citizens of this country, this is what being in control is about. When we can speak about the revolution of having photovoltaic on our houses so that the average man can own a house in this country, that is what taking control of your destiny is about. When we can speak about reducing our density in these high density areas where 10 persons living in a home, and we creating the lands, whether it's planning gains or we are purchasing the lands and we are investing the lands, like I'm doing now, to ensure that we reduce the density in the housing areas and that persons can live comfortably. That is what being in control of your destiny is about. But I missed one thing that I should have mentioned to you earlier, and I will go back there because it is critical. We have over 100 persons from the Hurricane Elsa in accommodation right now. And while I said we are not perfect, we still have some 44 persons waiting to go into accommodation. We are not going to tell stories in these walls of Parliament. This is not a perfect situation. These are the challenges that we face, that we are battling with. But you know what? The Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, they have been responsible, the member for St. Michael South and the member for the city and the former minister, the member for St. Thomas, they were responsible for allocating persons to these houses, finding the houses in this country to put 100 persons while we rebuild their homes. And we are paying for the accommodation. And I want to thank the member for St. Philip North, who's not here, sorry. The Ministry of Agriculture, they're feeding the people in accommodation. That is what a caring government does. So as I stand here, Mr. Speaker, discussing this housing resolution to acquire these 7.2 acres, I had a story to tell. I ain't finished with the story. I may end today, but I'll come back at the story because all cannot be said today. I won't detain the chamber because there are other members who would want to speak on this matter. But Mr. Speaker, let me mention to you one of the revelations as well. Because as we speak about acquiring lands to build these houses, and I don't want to speak out of term, so I will reference what I have here. Give it the right title, because very often, sometimes you give the wrong title to some of these matters, and persons get the wrong impression. But I want to thank the member for St. Philip West, the Gateway Initiative Program, Construction Gateway Initiative Program. That's in there, right, member, for St. Philip West, right? We have identified some unskilled persons that we need to skill up in this program as we seek to build our housing stock. We have some 425 workers, temporary workers. Approximately 300 of these workers have already signed on in the various training disciplines of this Gateway program, Construction Gateway Training Initiative, in areas of painting, tiling, backhoe operations, carpentry, basic and electrical installation. I think I mentioned plumbing. I want to thank the member for St. Philip West for coming up with this initiative, because we are skilling up these young people and they're given the opportunity to get involved in our upskilling. The same thing, man. Upskilling, skilling up, it's the same thing. You know, the legal term is upskilling. But nonetheless, we are training these young individuals and not so young so that they have a skill. When we're finished with this program of rebuilding these 1,496 houses across the 3 agencies, this program will give us some persons who we can, as the boys will say, let them loose in the construction sector to earn a living. They will have a skill and start a business. And these are some of the innovations that we have created, and you know, the creativity of this government who is in control. These are some of the things that we have done. So we have married the labor force into our rebuilding hurricane relief effort so that these persons can have a skill and start their own businesses. We ain't stopped there. We have just sent out some young persons on the road, persons from Community College, Barbados Community College, Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute. These are persons who have gone out on the road to analyze our housing stock in a program called Seek and Secure. And I'm sure some of you, those of you who passed through your constituencies, because I saw them in St. George 2 weeks ago, they were wearing I thought they were from the UPP party canvassing already, because I had to stop and ask, you know, what happened in here? But then I realized they were in the same color as that institution. But they were assessing the housing stock in this country. They were looking at various structures, wooden structures, wall and wood structures, and looking to see how resilient, doing the collecting data on the age of the houses, looking to bring that data so those persons who have the responsibility for assessing the housing stock can tell you whether these houses, which houses are vulnerable, which houses need hurricane strap. And we have the hurricane strap program, where we are providing 10,000 hurricane straps to persons, these type of structures, when we assess. And we're doing 5,000 in the first instance. So when we're talking about a government that is under control, we're talking about this government in out of control, because we're doing the things that matter to our people and our citizens. We're doing the things that stimulating our economy. We're doing the social engagement, assessment, involvement to alleviate some of the stresses from our people. And the ministry is confident that after all these programs, married with what we are doing here, married with our relief effort, married with our efforts to bring in hardwood houses, and that is a project that we are working on, not yet reached cabinet's approval, and I'm not going too deep into it. I said I will come back here again. Whether it is vesting of lands, some more lands to be vested, like Lower Burney, Searles. We have a lot more to be vested in national housing, so we can enter into private-public partnerships, joint ventures to build homes in this country for all classes of people. You will see what being in control is all about. But Mr. Speaker, let me end off by saying to the good people of St. George that this vesting will provide some houses, some 42 houses in that area of Brighton. And if you know the area, Brighton that area is in an agricultural belt, but it is not agricultural land. And the physical development plan gives us the authority to build on these lands, the non-agricultural land. And it was once a playing field. You know, I spoke to my dad and I asked him last night, Dad, you have anything to tell me? I'm doing the vesting of the lands that you played on in international housing to build housing. You know, and he said to me, this is a man in his 80s, he said to me, son, he called me Dwight. He said, Dwighty, those lands now can't play any cricket on. That was a kerchief. And you all need to have bigger fields. And he's right, because when you look at the size of a cricket field now, we need 5 to 6 acres. But the size of that field is less than the acres that I am speaking here on. It was once a Brighton cricket field. You know, where in those days, those who understand cricket would know when you're playing on a kerchief, you have to bowl tight, tight, tight. You have to bowl tight, because if anyone top edge, you're going for 6. Yeah, you're playing 3s and 4s and 2s and 4s. You know, so these lands, we're not taking away prime agricultural lands. We're utilizing non-agricultural land in an agricultural belt to provide housing solutions for the people, not only of St. George South, but the people of St. George South will get their fair share. And we are targeting low to medium to middle income bracket. You know, we spoke about categorizing those persons earning less than $2,500 and persons earning between $2,500 and $4,000 a month. So housing is coming to St. George. These lands will be vested, and certainly the member for St. George North as well. We don't leave out one another. We do things as a team, and of course, she has to be part of this allocation as the member for St. George North has to be part of this allocation of housing stock within the St. George parish. And Mr. Speaker, you know, I say to the people of St. George, we are still looking at some lands in Draxall, and within Draxall, you know, Draxall is a large plantation. I'm not going into any discussion on it today, only to say that we are looking at to acquire some land in the area of the Rexall, in the vicinity of the pavilion and the playing field for low-income housing as well. And we're also looking at an area in St. George North. We're the member for St. George North, and we're looking at that is Cottage. When we went on our rubbing shoulders, we're also looking to bring some housing solutions to the people of St. George. And I said we do it as a team. So I ain't going to leave out my partner, because my partner don't leave me out. You know, if she's weak, I am weak. If I'm weak, she's weak also. So the people of St. George, we are here today, vesting lands in NHC to build houses. The surveyor plan was certified by the surveyor and recorded in Lands and Surveys on October 13, 2006. And we have a copy of the plan. And Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, I support the introduction of this resolution into the Parliament pertaining to the vesting of 7.2 acres of land at Brighton, St. George in National Housing Corporation. The Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, has certified the resolution as being in order for consideration by this Honourable House. And with those words, I take my seat, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I beg to move this resolution, that this resolution now pass.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas. Mic is on. Mic is on. Yeah, Mike.
Bobby White. Thank you, sir. I wish to commend the Honourable Member for St. George South for the efforts that he is making in this respect, and trust that he will continue in this vein to ensure that residents of Barbados get the piece of the rock that they deserve and the services that will go with it in association with the amenities and other aspects of it. So I want to commend him for that, and to remind him and other members in this country that this government and this Labour Party set of members here, it is our plan to be able to continue to pursue the goals that were designed in our various manifestos across the many years to ensure that Barbadians get a piece of this rock. I just wish, though, to publicly remind him that it is extremely important that we in St. Thomas get the piece of the pie too. And I am happy that he would have made mention of the spots for the persons at 40 acre, and it is not house spots for persons who already have houses, because one of the media houses would have created quite a stir in there a couple of weeks ago when I made reference to those 40 spots at 40 acre to serve those residents who have land with no houses, but the land has been lying fallow for many years as a result of the Environmental Protection Act, in order for us to ensure that the cave and the other aspects that lead into the cave will not be in any way compromised. You would have known, Mr. Speaker, that in the past there were persons who did heavy agriculture in Allen View, and because of the development of the cave, one family was removed, and she is now operating in St. Lucie, thankfully. But there are others who engaged in agricultural aspects of living to do the rearing of pigs and and chickens and so on, and that they would have had to minimize or curtail. But as that happens, people still live in Allen View, and Allen View has always been a village in existence for many, many years, and therefore it is no plan of this government to disenfranchise any member or any resident who lives in that community. So I am happy that this government determined that those 40 lots at 40 acre will facilitate the individual owners of the land who cannot develop because you will appreciate, Mr. Speaker, since that Environmental Protection Act was instituted, the land is just lying fallow. You cannot rear the animals, you cannot do certain components of agriculture, and therefore the grass is growing, and the guys from MTW and NCC are cutting that grass every time that it grows. We do not want for those residents to feel that their lives are in danger because of what will happen if those properties are not well cared for. And so I am happy that the lots are going to be made available. I just want the Honourable Minister, sir, to pay as much attention to those 40 lots in 40 acre and to treat it with alacrity, because the residents can build absolutely nothing, and I do not encourage any of them to go to set up any illegal structures, because I know town planning will take them down, and that is the role of town planning in my particular situation. So I'm asking him, sir, to please ensure that that land has the development done as a matter of urgency. I also want, sir, to again commend him for continuing the vision of the Barbados Labour Party, where in an administration of another late Honourable Prime Minister, Right Honourable Prime Minister, devised with his Parliament, his Cabinet, and then through Parliament, that Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act that has transformed the villages in Barbados. We know we came out of slavery. We know how our people were treated who worked on the plantation lands. They had to have their chattel houses. I'm not going to rehash that because that is the history. And therefore, I believe that the empowerment that people deserve at 10 cents per square foot in rural Barbados, and to go further in the time of another right honourable member, the honourable member for St. Peter, now deceased as well, where he ensured that the urban projects were devised and the legislation put in place for persons living in urban Barbados to access the lands they were living on at $2.50 per square foot. Those were private properties, while this one with the 10 cents per square foot. As you know, sir, you're a well-educated person, and our other members and Barbadians generally, that is 10 cents per square foot. Now, we have some unscrupulous landowners, sir, in the parish of St. Thomas, and I believe it's across the island in rural Barbados, where many people are still seeking to have access to the land, access in the sense of being able to do the purchasing, but unfortunately are not given that privilege because some of the property owners, and meaning the plantation owners, are demanding that the spots are going at $15 per square foot, not on my living body. They cannot be going at $15 per square foot when the legislation says it's $10 per square foot. And what is bothering me most is that many of them are not aware that they're to fill out the forms and send them down to the Ministry of Housing. But there's scores of others. I sat and I assisted some in preparing the forms because they had their issues, and all you're hearing, but ma'am, I still have my rent book. I said, well, keep your rent book, excuse me. Don't give it to a lawyer, don't give it to anybody, hold on to it. That is the evidence that you were living here since the 1950s or 40s or whatever. And therefore, they are a little trouble now because most of them are getting older. Many of the children would have moved out, but they want to own the piece of rock at 10 cents per square foot. And so I'm asking the Honourable Minister and his team at the National Housing and the Ministry of Housing and Lands to work with alacrity to make sure that a specific individual or 2 or 3 individuals will work and accelerate those requests to be able for people to get their papers in their hand. That's what they say, I got my papers. And if they don't have the papers, their children will not be able to access the land, because then you will hear it was not in your name, it was your grandmother's name, it was your old slave grandfather's name, all kinds of things. And unless we continue as a government and a people to educate others who would have been some of the strongest people and families in this country to raise decent children and to teach them how to be good entrepreneurs and how to be faithful to their neighbors and to assist and to be courteous and to go to school and learn, unless we make sure that we make those people happy before they go into Alzheimer's or dementia or to the great beyond. It is the business of this government to carry that Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act even further ensuring that those poor people get the papers or the documentation or the title deeds, if that's what they're called, sir, I wouldn't be familiar with it, that they can speak with pride and then bequeath whatever they receive to their children. So for someone to be telling a senior citizen that they now have to pay $30,000 for that land that they would have worked so hard and all day and night on, when they know that it is 3,000 square feet at 10 cents per square foot, though, it's $300. It is wrong, it is criminal. And I want the Honourable Minister to listen to me, now not to the member for Christchurch East, but to listen to me, because I am going to be a loose cannon when I see poor people from anywhere in Barbados being taken advantage of. And that is what is happening with some of the landowners, not only in St. Thomas, the plantation owners, not only in St. Thomas, but across Barbados, because they think that the people are illiterate and that they don't know what's going on. And sometimes the children don't step back into the communities with their parents and guardians and help them over the processes. So, Honourable Minister, sir, through you, I would like for that special department to treat to those persons for tenantry spots that they deserve and they have earned, but the documentation needs to be processed. The land survey needs to happen, and I believe that is similar in urban Barbados. Let those people who are living on spots 50 years and they don't even know who the property owners are, but they're willing to pay towards accessing the house spots and to be able to walk with pride to know that their labor has not been in vain. I also want to commend the then government and this one. Well, this one, I don't know that we're doing the General Workers Fund anymore, but that would have helped in a tremendous way with persons. The Housing Credit Fund and the General Workers Fund would have been able to assist thousands of Barbadians. And when you pass through, and I speak to St. Thomas again, but when you look at St. Joseph and St. George and the other communities in St. Peter and St. Lucie in rural Barbados, we see houses that were chattel houses. And that was the order of the day from the slavery. Take up your house and go. It is no longer the case. The whole landscape of rural Barbados has changed, but there's still people who have been left out of the loop. I want for them to be able to access as well. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am concerned because I would wish to indicate, sir, that I too have spaces in St. Thomas that have been laying fallow for many years. And there are private people who would want, rather than grow sugar cane or be engaged in any form of agriculture, they want to grow houses, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when I focus on what has been happening in a section of the parish, where for the last 30 to 40 years, it's only grass, bush, and people are even afraid to walk. So some of these communities have become very, very lonesome and dangerous. As a matter of fact, when I think of Endeavour St. Thomas, a plantation that adjoins Duke's Tenantry, Lion Castle, Endeavour, Hindman's Hill, that is where it is located, there is so much potential there for houses to be placed there, to bring that area alive, because all it has been doing over the last 25 years, Mr. Speaker, sir, is every once in a while you're finding a body of a human being in that general Hindman's Hill, Endeavour area. I had a dear friend of mine, he and his teacher were at Erdeston with me, and his body was found there a few days later. Up until recently, there was a young man from St. Philip who went to Kadooment. His body was found down in Hindman's Hill. There have been women's bodies found there because the area is so lonesome, and the shrubbery, the overgrown bush, if that is what it is creating a bloody, excuse me, I beg your pardon, sir, a big nuisance, an unfortunate nuisance. And therefore, I am requesting, sir, that an aspect of Endeavour be acquired, and it is adjoining Vaucluse and Jukes as well. But Jukes Tenantry is a cul-de-sac. And once you go through that cul-de-sac, you have to keep coming back out in order to get to Lion Castle, or to get to the same Hindman's Hill, or to get to any of the other communities that are adjoining. And therefore, to develop sections of Jukes and Endeavour will have more people in St. Thomas being able to own a piece of the rock. And I specifically say St. Thomas, because I know we're not going to get a house in anywhere in the city that government will be building. I don't want a single, Mr. Speaker. And the Honourable Minister, please listen to me. I don't want a single housing unit, not one. People would prefer to buy the spot, have the houses built, and to be able to do whatever animal husbandry, whatever aspects of agriculture they will desire. And so I'm going to ask the minister, please, at some point in time, to give me a hearing, because a lot of people in Barbados feel that because we are becoming aged, and I might be the second oldest in this honourable chamber, that I have no needs or I have no voice. I was brought here, sir, 6 times people voted for me to represent their interests, and I am not going to deny my people in St. Thomas, St. Lucie, wherever, once they contact me, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm going to work with them, because that is what politics is about. Politics is about people. And if you can't help them, you tell them. So I want the Honourable Minister, please take note. 40 acres already there, please install the road, but make sure that some kind of acquisition is made for persons to be able to purchase some lots, that they too can get their independence. There are large families in St. Thomas. My mother had 8 children. All of them are not going to stay at home, and they want to be able to expand because they've got their children, their grandchildren, and the many other families in that way. And because they are working, they want to be able to get their own privacy. But I encourage them still go back and look for mommy and daddy and the others, because many of them need to keep that community spirit going, to look after the senior citizens, Mr. Speaker. It's another conversation we must have. Senior citizens are suffering because children and family are moving out and leaving granny and granddad and auntie and uncle on their own. And then we know the negative things that are happening to them. They need that kind of assistance, sir. Now, Mr. Speaker, I also want to implore the other minister to start looking a little more seriously at my challenges in St. Thomas again, in relation to the houses that were damaged by Tropical Storm Thomas, and indeed some of them that were damaged in Ericot in particular the weekend before. I have grown tired, sir. I have grown tired of calling and asking and begging for formal reports. And you know, sir, I am like a sandfly. I am all over the place, because once I get the calls, I am going to visit once the Lord continues to give me the strength. And I am not comfortable that I have had about 76 to 80 houses damaged in Tropical Storm Thomas. So excuse me, Thomas, I don't want it to be like in Thomas, because Thomas saw the devastation in 2010, and that last administration would not touch a house in St. Thomas, Mr. Speaker, sir. Not a single house, till I saw houses had to be bulldozed. And I also witnessed people whose houses got damaged, were employed, had little or no money, and they had to call on another sector that is in this society to be able to purchase 2 sheets of galvanized and some lumber. And that team, another ethnic group, sir, would bring or deliver. And that is how some of my people were able to get the houses rehabilitated to a point where they can live. So 2010, no, not Thomas, Tropical Storm Elsa. That is exactly what I'm referring to, because I don't want for this government to renege on its responsibility like that last administration did with the houses and properties from Tropical Storm Thomas. So I'm talking now of 2021 Tropical Storm Elsa, as well as the freak storm that came before. I do not know who the contractors are. Up until this morning around 3 o'clock, I'm getting WhatsApp messages with houses that the lights are flickering on and off like a Christmas tree. Families are still living in them. One person sent me buckets catching water because St. Thomas seems to be one of the most fertile parishes in this country. It rains every day, Mr. Speaker. You might need to want to come up there, sir, and get some of the breeze and the beauty and the refreshing showers. But if our house tops have been blown off and they have not been fixed, what can we do? And to call from now to the cows come home, it is not right. And you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am passionate about people who suffer. And sometimes how slow some agencies operate. And I'm not badgering anybody. I am just saying I want the houses finished. I have the photographs, grass growing almost as tall as the houses. And I don't know who the contractors are, and they are not calling anybody at National Housing or the Ministry of Housing, nor are they calling Rural Development Commission, because we are in rural Barbados, so it's not urban. I want to know how many houses in St. Thomas have been repaired, because I cannot tell you two. I want to know how many have not yet been visited, and I have the list. And therefore, I want the Honourable Minister, while he is referring to the others, and I'm happy for those who have gone back into their homes, I would wish for those who are still living in their houses, right opposite Allen View, where the Harrison's Cave car park is a family where the house the roof has collapsed since 2021, Thomas. The lady is in there in a wheelchair, Mr. Speaker. And Thomas, I don't know what's wrong with Thomas, because I live in St. Thomas, but forgive me. The lady is in there with her family, scotching, and the rain poured all in St. Thomas this morning. When they got to Bridgetown, Mr. Speaker, so it was like the sun shining every day. And the Honourable Member for St. Andrew has a similar experience. When it comes to the rain, I cannot speak of his housing, because he might be luckier than I. And I want this Honourable Chamber and this government to know I am aging, but I am not turning stupid. And I am not reneging on my responsibilities, although I know that I'm going over on the other side. I'm not going to pay the honour member for the church, whatever it is, any attention. I know his passion for senior citizens, sir, especially females. So I'm not dealing with that at all. But he's interrupting me in my flow, sir, and I would not wish for him to cause me any distraction, sir. And so, Mr. Speaker, even though I write and request the reports, even though I send the WhatsApp messages and the photographs, I still am not getting the responses, but because not like you, sir, but I live on the broad road where cars pass and people shout for me and I can give them a fruit and they can ask for whatever. So I am interrupted every day. I'm not saying that in a negative way, but people are coming to say, my house ain't get touched, the contractor ain't come back. This thing, the next thing, that is negative. That is not how we operate as a people. And so I want the minister to make sure that some special department is also designed to go out and do the visits. And for rural development, for that to also happen as well, because I know rural is not under his watch. I am not happy about it. And I have to speak, because if I am not careful, the calls, the complaints, the criticisms will only make me grayer and ugly, and I'm a beautiful, aging old girl. So I don't want for that to happen. But I finally say, sir, what I consider to the Honourable Minister to be good is that for those who would have been able to have theirs repaired, congratulations. And those who are at a stage of finality, congratulations. But I want to be in that equation, sir, as well. I say finally, sir, that I believe that the initiative for us, let me say that the persons who are in shelter, I know that some people have been relocated to their own homes, and that the government is spending a pretty penny, and so it should, to make sure that houses have been rented, or apartments have been rented for those persons to have their life brought back in order. And of course, I am happy to know that some of those houses would have been done, and the numbers are lessening, and I want to congratulate, well, the former permanent secretary and her team, as well as the current minister and his team, for continuing to make sure that those persons get back into their homes and minimize the discomfort. You cannot be comfortable. It's like living in a hotel room. You're packing in the suitcase and putting away. You're washing in the face basin. All kinds of things. It is not an easy life to live. And therefore, I am happy that he has been able to get, the Honourable Minister has been able to get a couple of hundred houses completed. But I want to be in the equation that I can praise him even more and love him even more His father has been one of the most wonderful persons I've known in many, many years, and I know that he's got a wonderful son. And therefore, I'm going to ask his son, look over at me and give me a little something. I have my houses too. But the final comment I wish to make, sir, is that the Honourable Minister referred to locations in the new developments that will facilitate persons who are disabled. And I believe that that is one of the best things that could happen, because persons are disabled not because they may have been born with deformities, but people fall on the job. They fall in the households. They have certain comorbidities that impact on their health. And it does not mean that they should be excluded and put in anywhere all by themselves where they have no proper living conditions or have no friends and others that they can meet with and discuss and be cheered up and so on and so forth. So I commend the Honourable Minister for that. But I want him to go a little further and get back to a policy that we know were in existence before, where persons living with HIV were also allocated spots and houses were built to facilitate them. It seems to me that over the years under the other administration of the 2008 and down to 2018, that did not continue. But we still have a lot of people living in this society who are living with HIV. And they are being treated with so much disrespect. And they're living in squalor. And some of them have children. I've never heard of a dog with HIV yet. Human beings. And you don't give it to yourself, and you can't tell by looking who your partner is, and so on. You can't tell whatever it is you touch and blood, but we have been on it, and so you can't tell. And therefore, why should these people be shunted in a corner and not being given the privilege that mankind, any human being, deserves? So I want in the future for that project to continue, where persons living with HIV get a house, a rural house, an urban house, some kind of shelter that gives them the dignity that they deserve to continue to live and to live well. If you're giving them the free medication and other services through the welfare department and others, let us give them the shelters over their heads. They can't work. If they go to work, some of them, and people get to find out, although you can't tell by looking, the neighbors come and say, she got AIDS, he live with AIDS, I don't let him get, and then they are ostracized. It has to stop. How could we be an educated society and put in millions upon millions of dollars in education, and then people are disrespecting? They're ostracizing. They're shunting aside others who sometimes through no fault of their own, they are inflicted with that disease. We didn't have to go anywhere for anybody to give us COVID. But many of us would have suffered with COVID, and we followed all of the protocols. And therefore, you cannot tell by looking. So I want to put in that plug for those with HIV and ask the Honourable Minister to include them again in the system and to integrate them in society so that they too can have and live with the dignity that they deserve. And the final one, Mr. Speaker, is, sir, for battered women. Too many reports are coming in, and we know that there is a facility specially assigned for battered women. But the numbers are growing exponentially. And those women are running with children. I'm not going to tell you, sir, that there aren't battered men too. Because any man hit me, he will be a battered man. So I'm not going to tell you that there aren't battered men too. And the men, if they are being battered, they too should have some element of comfort. So I'm going to ask the minister in his planning and in his building, take a look at the Battered Women's Center, or look for a location. His officers will know where lands are, where properties are, so that the facilities can be upgraded to a level where they will be habitable, and that women and their children that they will run with will be safe. There's only one location, and now that has overgrown its usefulness to the extent that it has so many females there with children. But during COVID, people were locked down, and there was so much, because the women would have been in the house with the men longer, and the men are coming home late, and they're demanding, and the poor women cannot say a word. The children are there, they don't want the noise, all kinds of things. I want the money at the end of the week to feed them, and therefore they are suppressed by such experiences as well. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister in his planning, and any other distinguished member here who has an idea as to a location that will be safe, and we will have to ensure that it's safe, will also be identified, because the numbers of battered women are growing exponentially. The other aspect of that is homeless women with children. And in the Ministry of People Empowerment, we had a location identified. 3 houses were built. Now there are persons who would have suffered through Tropical Storm Elsa that are occupying those 3 houses. But there is still a facility there that I believe now that the new minister can make some approaches to some donor agencies, local or internationally, to have the location upgraded, because there are entities in Barbados that are willing to work to help to offer training for those homeless women and to make sure that they get the meals and that their children go to school and they're well looked after, to be able to give them that comfort. It is no easy experience for persons to send messages at midnight. And you know, the honorable member for the city will soon get 1 million, because I'm going to direct some to him, because I'm no longer in that capacity. But my feeling and passion for them to be made safe is really very, very important. And so I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister of Housing and Lands to have another look at that project, where there is a facility, there was furniture and all of that in it. The 3 houses that are being occupied, when those persons return to their homes, that a special look be given for homeless women and their children to be facilitated, and there is space on that compound, where in that area, that there can be expansion so that independent living could be offered to those women. And then, and this is the point, they must be graduated out. We do not want it to be a Lancaster house of the past, where persons who suffered land slippage and houses were burnt and so lived in there for 10 or 15 years. They couldn't get them out. There has to be a program in place. You get the training, they are handheld, they are redirected out of the system, so other homeless women or battered women can get the opportunity, once they get on their feet, to go back and live in the regular society. And so, Mr. Speaker, I wish to express my gratitude to the Honourable Minister for the efforts that he has been making. He has inherited some, but when you inherit something, you work with it as well. And I have every confidence that he and the team at Rural Development Commission and any other entity will continue to look after the interests of the people of Barbados, to make sure that they live that quality life that we deserve. And I close by reminding honourable members here, our late honourable member for St. Peter, the professor, the honourable member for St. Peter will always say he came to government to stop poor people from being poor. This Barbados Labour Party has a motto that says, a better life for our people. And unless we follow those 2 mantras to make sure that people get better lives, that poor people are lifted out of the quagmire of poverty and put on a platform where they can become independent and then give back to society, whether it be through training in the community or serving the senior citizens or whatever positive aspect there is, I believe that we can do it collectively and individually, and another 10 years from now, we should see a Barbados that has been nurtured in a way that people work, give back, improve the quality of their lives, and we all live in a safer and secure Barbados. I wish to thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just thought I needed to add my voice in support of the resolution before the House. I believe it is maybe generally accepted that housing is one of those areas that demands the attention of any organization that is asked to lead in a country such as ours. I applaud both the minister and the government generally for recognizing that importance and for moving forward on this matter of the provision of housing for Barbadians. I'm not going to be very, very long, but I need to share a few things. One, and this probably follows on from what the Honourable Member for St. Thomas was saying. Mention was made earlier about the challenges of housing in the urban corridor. And what I would want to say to us, Mr. Speaker, to the Chamber, is that if housing in rural Barbados is not addressed, then there will continue to be challenges for housing in urban Barbados. It is a reality of our historical development. That is to say, in the country, in rural Barbados, the focus was on agriculture. And so persons, in order to survive, had to work on the plantation. For those who wanted to escape the plantation, they moved to urban centers. And in Barbados, those who wanted to escape the plantations moved to town. We call it moving to town. Those of us from the country know what we mean when we say people move to town. The person go on town to live, not necessarily within the city of Bridgetown, but anywhere in the St. Michael area was considered having gone to town. And that was because persons needed to have access to employment. And so the commercial activity, the trading, the supermarkets, the stores, the distributive sector, all of those places of employment, places of business, were in the urban area. And if we are to ensure that we can address the matter of housing in urban Barbados, we have to make sure that we address the matter of housing in rural Barbados. That is not just a matter for the minister and the ministry responsible for housing, because there are other business, employment-oriented activities that need to be a part of the mix. But it will be important, it is important, that the Ministry of Housing addresses both areas simultaneously. We cannot address urban Barbados and then address rural Barbados. And this resolution for the vesting of land in Brighton speaks, in my view, to a start in that recognition that we need to address rural Barbados, because even though it is close to St. Michael, Brighton is still considered part of rural Barbados. The people who sent me here asked me to say a couple of things in this debate. We have a single housing estate in St. Peter, and that is the housing estate at Maynards. It is a relatively small housing estate. And one of the things that the residents in the Maynards say to me frequently is that I need to make sure that because the estate is small in terms of number of blocks and number of units, that it is not forgotten at the expense of the much larger housing estates. And so I hear my friend, the Honourable Member for St. George South, referring from time to time to the housing estates. Many people do not remember that there's a housing estate in Maynards that requires attention as well. And so if our people are not to feel that they are second to others, then we have to bear in mind all of the estates, those that are large, that contain thousands of persons, and those that are smaller, that may house just a few hundred persons. But in the Maynards estate, and I believe this is reflected in other housing estates as well, the matter of design for an aging population. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas spoke the fact that persons, and she was referring specifically to persons who live in what we call tenantry land, those persons are getting older. It is also a reality that those who live in the housing estates are also getting older. The children, just like on the plantation tenantries, are moving out, moving on, going to town, as I said earlier. But those who remain in those units are getting older. And the challenge that I'm seeing, the challenge that exists in the Maynard's estate is that the fact that the unit is a two-story unit presents its particular challenges for persons who are getting older. These persons are not able to make a simple decision to move somewhere else. They're in these units for a reason. And we have to address our minds to how we can adapt these units to allow for a decent quality of life for those older persons who live in those units. I did not come, Mr. Speaker, with the answer or with a solution, but I believe, like Scripture says, that in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And some have adjusted that to say in the multitude of counselors, there is wisdom. And I believe that we can put our heads together to come up with a solution, because we do have an aging population. It affects not just our social security, but it affects how people live from day to day. In the Maynard's estate, we also have some challenges with electricals, and those need to be addressed as well. I'm mentioning these here because it needs to be kept front of mind. Persons who live in housing estates must not be forgotten in this country. This country, and I'm happy to be, very proud actually, to be a member of this party, this Barbados Labour Party, a party that has always recognized that all people are worthy of attention. And so the matter of the electricals in Maynard's needs to be addressed. I'm happy that we have had some movement in terms of addressing the well covers, because I would hate, and I sympathize, whenever I think about this, I think about the Honourable Member for St. Michael's Southeast. I would hate to have to live through an unnecessary loss. And I'm saying to those who work with the National Housing Corporation, you have a responsibility to inspect housing units. You have a responsibility to make sure that where there is danger to life or limb, that those matters are addressed with urgency. I too often get the sense that those who are charged with these responsibilities do not appear as though they understand that these are human beings that we're talking about. And so when somebody's child is running the risk of being injured or worse, it is a matter that needs to be addressed. It is a matter that needs to be accorded a certain level of urgency. Now, outside of the housing estate in St. Peter, and I am being deliberately, at this point, being very parochial, because whenever, Mr. Speaker, I drive onto this compound, I am acutely aware that I drive onto this compound. The only reason why I do not go into the public gallery is because the people of St. Peter voted to have me come through a different door. And so I am always conscious of my responsibility to be their voice in this place. St. Peter, like many rural parishes, and I'm saying parish rather than constituency, because in St. Peter we have St. Peter almost unanimously does not recognize constituency. Wherever you're from in St. Peter, As a matter of fact, some people are offended having to vote in other constituencies that do not carry the name St. Peter. It is something that I grew up understanding, and when I heard from the former honourable member who preceded me, former Prime Minister, he also recognized it and always counseled us to treat St. Peter as St. Peter. And so if you get calls from other constituencies where the address is St. Peter, you treat it like St. Peter. In St. Peter, there is an attachment that residents have to the parish. And residents do not easily move out of St. Peter. But in many cases, we have no choice because housing development has not kept pace with the population growth. Our residents, and we as residents, because I'm one, I have been fortunate enough, having grown up in Rose Hill, to still be able to live in Rose Hill. But there are many people who have had to leave in order to make a life for themselves, to use a term that we would say. I want to call on us in our housing development to see where we can, around the existing communities, find additional land for additional houses. I get the impression sometimes that it may be more economical to look for larger plots of land. Plots that can hold maybe 30 houses, 40, 50 houses. But I want to suggest that in the interest of community life, in the interest of maintaining some fine community spirit that already exists, that we may need to look at situations where we can add an additional 5 or an additional 10 spots so that persons who have grown up, who have become an integral part of the community, can continue to live in the community and make sure that that life continues, that it survives, and that the spirit which we want to maintain, that spirit that helps with the raising of children, but that spirit that also addresses certain issues of safety and security and sometimes criminal activity. If we want to address these matters, then housing and maintaining existing communities, particularly in rural Barbados, needs to be addressed, needs to be looked at, maybe in a different way to the way we've looked at it in the past. I also want to indicate, and while we are not aggressive people in St. Peter, I'm going to still use the term that I could be, but let me use former Prime Minister's term. If I don't mention this when I talk about housing, I'm going to get humbugged in St. Peter. Housing and the provision of housing, the maintenance of existing communities only makes sense if there is commensurate infrastructure. And Mr. Speaker, today, this afternoon, I'm speaking particularly about roads, and I'm speaking about water. The people who sent me here expect me to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that we have a number of communities. If I come from south to north, there's Black Bess. To get to Black Bess, you have to destroy your shops. If you travel by bus, the bus shops have to be destroyed in order for you to get home. That's Black Bess. If you live in Fort Hill, or Indian Ground, or Lonesome Hill, or Orange Hill, or Missum, or Prospect, or French Village, in order, but not so much French Village, except that if you come through Mount Breveter, you have the same issues. But the road through Indian Ground, Mr. Speaker, must be one of the worst roads in Barbados. So if you live in Roebuck, if you live in Sedge Pond, a large community, a large, well-knit community, a community that people do not want to leave, but to get home, either through Indian Ground or through Sailor Gully, means that you have to drive through what could be considered a cart road. It is not acceptable. The people who live in these areas recognize that government cannot fix every road in Barbados all at once. As a matter of fact, the people in St. Peter recognize that the last government, those persons who are now trying to cause, a little bit of strife in the community, I don't pay them a lot of attention because my father, who the Honourable Member for St. George South referred to, is one of the wisest people I know. And he told me all the time, he is now deceased, don't waste your time with fools. It was very, very simple. And that's one of the reasons why, Mr. Speaker, I don't spend a lot of time talking, I try not to talk foolishness, but I try even harder not to spend a lot of time with fools. And so, but in the spirit of mentioning fools, the people of St. Peter recognize that the last Democratic Labour Party government spent 10 years doing absolutely nothing in relation to road infrastructure in this country. The people, however, are saying to me to share in this chamber that they expect those who work at Jerusalem Depot to get up off of their sit down and do some work in the community. And I'm being very clear in what I'm saying here today. And I'm saying it understanding that sometimes when you appear to offend somebody, you can end up getting a backlash. But I'm putting all of them on notice. This member of parliament is not going to be accepting no backlash. He will get on.
Ignorant.
That is correct, Mr. Speaker.
Understood.
He will. And so what can be done ought to be done. There's no reason why I should be driving through these kinds of potholes in Indian Ground. And if I go to Boscobel, I have the same issue. If I drive through Gaze, the same issue. If I go into Mount Number 1 and Mount Number 2, the same issue. If I go into Mount Breveter, the same issue. If I go into Farm Road, the same issue. The people of St. Peter are not going to be accepting this. If housing is going to make sense, then we need to be able to get to our houses. Housing is part of a quality of life equation. You don't parachute to your house. We don't do that. As a matter of fact, this party recognizes that. There are other parties where people parachute into leadership, where people appear all of a sudden. They used to be a member of one party, and then all of a sudden, they parachute into the thing. We don't go that direction. We don't do it politically, but we don't do it in terms of our access to our communities either. And so the people of St. Peter are asking for attention to be paid to the roads. We are asking for continued attention to be paid to water. We are seeing, and they've asked me to express thanks as well, because from where I come from, we don't just criticize, we give thanks where thanks is due. We've seen improvements in the delivery of water. We still have issues with the coloration. We understand that that is dependent on mains replacements. We are happy for the work so far from Lambert's coming into Boscobel. We feel, I say we, because I speak on behalf of those who live in Boscobel, Tree Hill, that entire area, that sometimes the work lags. Sometimes people disappear. We want want both the Thomas Bridge to be completed, and we also want the mains to continue to be laid. We do not want the mains that have been assigned to the Boscobel project to be taken up and sent somewhere else in Barbados. We have suffered for too long, and we want the water issue addressed. We look forward to the work continuing at Colleton. We're happy for that. The residents recognize that once that comes on stream, then more water flows into Half Acre. And if more water comes into Half Acre, more water gets to Lamberts. And if more water gets to Lamberts, then more water gets to the Boscobel Reservoir, and then it flows down into the community. So we're happy for the work that has been done. I also want to thank the Barbados Water Authority, particularly through the Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael's Southeast, for the provision of tanks. The residents who have received those tanks are thankful. They are thankful too, but they are thankful for that gesture which allows them to live a more comfortable life in relation to the provision of water. I am really happy to be part of a government that, even though it cannot address all the burning issues immediately, is able to address bit by bit. But like the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, it must be clear, and I will not tire of making it clear, that the people of St. Peter expect to get some of the addressing of issues when issues are addressed. The impact of housing generally, Mr. Speaker, is one that cannot be overstated. It really cannot be overstated. When I thought of a contribution to the debate today, I was thinking of housing in the economy. Because housing, by its nature, is an important aspect of economic development. When we speak to housing, we sometimes, and maybe too often, think only of the provision of shelter. But the construction of housing generates its own economic activity, so that tradespeople are employed. There is transportation. There is the provision of hardware and other items through hardware stores. There is mining and quarrying that takes place. There are a whole number of different strands to economic activity that arise out of housing and the provision of housing. And so, and I must say, when I talk about the provision of employment, we talk about employment in the trades, and I want to add my voice to the voice of the Honourable Member for St. George South in commending the Honourable Member for St. Philip West on the Construction Gateway project, because that project will equip Barbadians. Barbadians want to be able to contribute. Barbadians want to be able to help to build this country. Barbadians, in order to do that, need the skills with which to do it. And we have a responsibility as a government, but the country as a whole has a responsibility to make sure that our people are provided with the skills. And that Construction Gateway project is a significant addition to the provision of skills for construction trades. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that from a pure economics perspective, the research is clear that persons who work in the trades have what we call a high propensity to consume. Or let me use a high marginal propensity to consume, so that with each additional dollar earned, a significant portion of that dollar goes back into the economy directly, almost immediately. And it is done either to purchase food, in some cases to help to do some repairs to the house that the person could not afford before. In many cases, and this is maybe just a factor of our sociological development, but in many cases, a lot of that money also has to go to support other people or another person. Let me be nicer to say to support another person. And so construction dollars end up buying school books, paying for hairdos, buying dresses, buying belts and pants, buying siding, buying galvanized sheets, buying jewelry. When persons work in construction, the economy feels the positive impact. And so we have to tie the provision of housing, the provision of shelter, what we would refer to as standard of living issues to economic activity. And so the provision of housing and housing projects is necessary for the economic development and advancement of the country. Our economy is an interconnected system. So you have construction in terms of housing. There's also construction in terms of businesses, hotels, places that employ other people. Houses don't employ people after the construction is complete, but other types of construction employ people after construction is complete. Along with construction comes infrastructure. There has to be roads, there has to be the provision of electricity. There are a number of things that come with construction. And then there's the environmental aspect. And we spent some time a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I believe, discussing and debating the Debt for Nature swap and the fact that a creative government, without adding to the debt stock, without increasing the debt, has freed up funds that will help us to address issues that will speak to mitigation, particularly coming out of the existing climate crisis. And so, Mr. Speaker, we as a government, we as a party in government, recognize that the approach to developing a country has to be a holistic one. We provide housing for our people. We provide other economic activity for our people. We also focus on other quality of life issues. So matters like education, we address, and we have addressed education by allowing Barbadians, ordinary Barbadians, to resume their studies at the University of the West Indies. We have addressed the matter of healthcare, and we are now coming out of the COVID crisis, and we have come out not having run out of oxygen, not having run out of ventilators, not having run out of ICU beds, because as a government, we sought to manage with our limited resources the crisis that faced us. We did it while allowing Barbadians to attend university. We did it while providing garbage trucks to collect garbage. We did it while providing buses to transport our people to and from school, work, wherever they're going. We did it while continuing to provide reverse tax credits to lower earning Barbadians. We did it while providing the compensatory tax credit so that persons at the bottom of the earning scale are able to get back some of what they've paid in VAT. We did it while capping the freight costs in relation to the calculation of duties. We have done it, Mr. Speaker, while addressing issues of occupational safety and health and putting into effect regulations that specify the kinds of organizations and the kinds of measures that must be put in place to protect ordinary Barbadians. And we have done it while adding funds to the welfare vote, and while, even as we speak, undertaking reform of our welfare system. Mr. Speaker, I think it is very clear that this government is on the right track. I think it is very clear that this government is not being sidetracked, is not being distracted, and I will continue to call on my colleagues to follow the instruction. And I know that if he were alive, he would want me to say this to the honourable member for St. George South, who he liked, who he tried to keep on the straight and narrow path. And he would tell me to tell him, don't waste your time with fools. Stay focused. There's a lot of work to be done. He spoke to the matter of the silent housing revolution. Our people are to be housed. The economy is to be stimulated. We're on the right path. Let us continue to keep people at the center of all our activity. And Mr. Speaker, I am confident that when our work is judged, we will be seen to have spent our time tirelessly working on behalf of the people of this country. I support this resolution. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to endorse the comments of previous members who have spoken before me in supporting this particular resolution, which seeks to provide housing, I won't say for the people of St. George alone, because I'm sure our policies are not directed at any one particular group, but to provide housing in the constituency of St. George South, which no doubt will benefit some of the honourable members' constituents and hopefully some of wider Barbados as well. I raise, Mr. Speaker, not to take too long on this particular resolution because I think there's general support for it, but perhaps more so to speak to some other wider issues that I believe are impacting on housing and housing development in this country. The honourable member would have indicated that in relation to a number of the projects that his ministry is seeking to embark on, one of them relates to the housing development at Lower Burney. I'm pleased to hear that the vesting is in the process of taking place. This has been a long number of years for me, certainly, sir, advocating for additional housing in St. Michael's Southeast to give people who I have seen in very overcrowded conditions now at least having a blink of hope to be able to participate in being selected for housing development in that area. We've already seen the project built up by the last Barbados Labour Party administration in that area. We have seen the development of a lovely housing project. And I recall, sir, that back in 2018, well, actually it was before 2018, but we were rubbing shoulders at that time, going into the communities, taking colleagues along with us on a journey to better understand the issues that each MP was facing and in turn the issues that were affecting residents across Barbados so that we could formulate our policies generally and in particular housing policies. And I recall my colleagues joined me in the Golden Rock area of the Pine, perhaps one of the most densely populated areas of that constituency in St. Michael's Southeast. They joined me, walked through the area. They were struck by what at the time was, and Mr. Speaker, you are smiling because I recall you were present as well in support of that cause. Visiting the residents and hearing the complaints and seeing firsthand the type of conditions that persons were having to endure. In many cases, because that particular housing estate was built in the early 1960s, it was one of the first developments under the National Housing Corporation. What had resulted was that a number of these, the walls, the electrical, everything had fallen into disrepair. And it was at that time, having communicated with the rest of the persons who had been on the ground, and certainly the Honourable Prime Minister, then Leader of the Opposition, that a commitment was made to the people of the Golden Rock area that once we came to office, that we would make all attempts to ensure that we ease some of the pressure. Sir, I don't have to tell you, you have had a social work background. You know full well, you've been in the law courts, and you are well aware that in some cases you have people, 15 people in a household, 6 of those are small children, the rest are adults, people taking turns in terms of how they sleep, when they sleep, and you know, it has become very difficult, certainly even for me as a representative, even when I was in opposition, making the case constantly that we needed to ease the pressure in the housing estates. I represent the largest housing estate in the country. At least, I think about 6,000 of my people out of my entire constituency are actually between the Pine and Wildy estates. And therefore, I speak with a certain passion every time I talk about this issue of the housing estates and the responsibility of the National Housing Corporation, because I feel very deeply hurt sometimes when I see what I see in relation to my community, where the conditions that people are living in, especially the social conditions, it is very difficult. And I believe that if we're able to provide better housing for these individuals, and certainly across Barbados, that we will have an opportunity to be able to also change behaviors. The fact that people have to get out of the house sometimes in order to lime often creates some of those conflict issues. The fact that people have to be in densely populated households also creates conflict issues, which then results in your Honourable Speaker having to represent them in another forum as well. And so I am particularly pleased that this particular program I outlined by the Honourable Minister is in the making. It has taken a long time, but in most things we have to be patient as well. However, as we look to basically building out and giving that opportunity to the residents of St. Michael's Southeast and certainly to the other areas, because not all of it, and let me just say for the benefit of honourable members, but for the country, all of the allocations will not come to St. Michael's Southeast, because that is not the way that we run things as a government. But what I think is important, and I want the people of the constituency to understand, is that an effort is being made by this administration to be able to ensure that we ease that pressure. What, however, that means, sir, is that while we do that and we work on that particular program, it also requires some thought to be given to what will happen to those particular houses. What will happen to those homes where we have eased some of the pressure. So we take a number of persons from those particular units and we move them to other units, and they're obviously able in a position to make a contribution, whether by way of a weekly income or rent to own or outright purchase, depending on the type of development that the Honourable Minister will then put on the table. But we have to start to think about what we're going to do with these houses and in terms of what will remain and who will remain, and whether we are going to also further allocate a budget to being able to improve what is there. Are we going to break down what is there and build back something else, or are we going to continue to look at finding additional lands to be able to accommodate these people? And I say this, sir, because I think that housing cannot just be about the now, but it has to be about planning for the future. As we're doing these surveys, I know the Honourable Minister has indicated that he has people on the ground trying to look at what the needs are across the country. We are asking people to call into the NHC, people who've been on the list for over 20, 30 years, trying to get a house. But the reality is that while we collect this information, I would call on the Honourable Minister to ensure that the planning officers within the ministry are starting to make considerations as to what comes next. Because while we build out, while we move out people, we are still laden with the difficulties of the electrical repairs that need to be done, the issues in relation to the wells and the maintenance. And while we've done in large measure a lot of the wells in certainly St. Michael's Southeast and some of the other areas, there is still work to be done in terms of the maintenance of these wells, sir. The fact of the matter is that the estates also lend themselves to open spaces. And I know that this is another big issue in terms of the maintenance of the estates. It's happening all across the country. Lands that are owned by the Ministry of Housing or under the control of the NHC, require a program to ensure that they are not only identified, but to ensure that they are properly cleaned as well. Because it then creates difficulties for MPs, and the Honourable Member will be well aware of this, where people are always complaining about rat infestation. They're complaining about the fact that the lots are overgrown with bush. But sometimes when you do these searches, you realize that the lands actually belong to the Crown, or the state in this case. And we find ourselves in a situation where as MPs, we are having to clean and clear the lands in order to make sure that women can walk home safely at night, that children do not feel that somebody is going to attack them and to bully them because the grass is overgrown in their communities. And so I feel that within the National Housing Corporation and the wider ministry, there has to be some serious thought given to the type of cleanup that is required in order to address a number of these issues, sir. Sir, I had the misfortune of losing a young man who fell into a well. And so when I speak of the issue of maintenance, I do so from a position of feeling the hurt and the loss of not just a resident of a community, but a close personal friend and family friend that lost his life as a result of somebody or people not paying attention to the things that they ought to do. So when I speak in the terms that, you know, sometimes we can do better as a country, that our workers can do better in terms of the maintenance and being able to identify what the issues are, but equally to find the solution, I do so against a background, sir, that having lost a child, having lost a life, that I understand that, you know, while things are not always perfect, that I believe that if we love our country, that we need to put systems in place to be able to make sure that we are able to properly maintain the assets that we have as a country. It is not sufficient for us to beat ourselves on the chest and say we have repaired X amount of wells, but then 3-4 years down the line, we have another issue where the casing for the well is broken, or that we have not removed the bush from around the well so that they can be properly identified. I think, sir, that while I know the role of the National Housing Corporation and the ministry constantly is expanding, as are other government ministries, the truth of the matter is that we equally have to keep up with the pace of ensuring that we have the adequate positions available to be able to carry out and to oversee a number of these areas as well. So it may require dedicated teams to be able to address those specific issues. We have a number of workers, yes, on the ground across constituencies cleaning, and we appreciate the efforts being made there. But there are times, sir, where, and it has nothing to do with the rain, where a call from the MP still has to come in order to remind the staff within a number of the entities that the area may need cleaning. And therefore, it begs the question, where is the maintenance program? Where is the maintenance program that allows us to know that every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, you need to go back and check that particular area? I heard the Honourable Member for St. Peter speak to challenges in relation to the depot that services his area. It is not germane to the Honourable Member, sir. This is an issue that plagues us across the entire ambit of government, where we have a situation where the issue of preventative maintenance is a problem. I had it when I was Minister of Education. I did my best to fix it, but with all the goodwill, I cannot change the behavior of individuals overnight. What I can do is continue to speak to the fact that as somebody who loves her country and believes that others love their country, that we must come to work and give an honest day's work and make sure that we are the eyes and ears over our staff to ensure that they are doing what they are supposed to do. It means that we are supposed to be at the front line, on the front line, making sure that we have follow through, that estates are not left in abeyance for a number of months or years without being attended to. It means, sir, that the National Housing Corporation may also have to look very carefully at a dedicated unit to be able to address the repairs that are necessary across the housing estates. The ones in St. Peter, the ones in Gaw Hill, the ones in St. Michael Southeast, and all of the areas across the country, the issues are the same. You have situations where you need to have the additional wells dug in order to make sure that you have either individual wells or communal wells. You need to make sure that they are regularly pumped as well. But there is no maintenance program where anybody can clearly identify that on a regular basis, every 2-3 months, that somebody's responsibility is there to go and to make sure that these things happen, sir. That is my concern. That is what, as young people say, that is my beef. That is the beef of most of us. Because as much as we as leaders of these various ministries will want to put the policy in place, we are dependent on people, human beings, to be able to execute the policies of the government. So we may say we must keep Barbados clean. We may say we are going to engage persons in order to be able to have them to beautify Barbados and to make sure that they are part of a program to help us to do things. But where do we fall down as a country is the fact that oftentimes nobody wants to bell the cat. Nobody wants to say when somebody is not doing their job. I spoke on Sunday, sir, regarding this issue. Because, you know, there's a saying by Shirley Chisholm that she was unbought and unbossed. And therefore, I am in nobody's back pocket. I speak my mind because that is what I have been sent by the people of St. Michael Southeast here to do. I speak my mind because that is how I was raised. I call a spade a spade. I am speaking frankly and candidly to people across this country that we can do better as a country. We can do better as a people. It is not sufficient for supervisors across our entire system, people who have been given the responsibility to oversee others. And supervision comes in many forms. Supervision does not mean the supervisor over the ASH program. It doesn't mean the supervisor over the NCC. It doesn't mean the supervisor over any of the agricultural programs. It means supervision in all its forms. I have to supervise those under me. Those under me have to supervise those under them. And those under them have to supervise the ones that they are responsible for, sir. And therefore, when we have these amount of complaints coming, whether it is for housing estates, whether it is for the depots, whether it is for wider government across the entire public service, they are coming, sir, not because we don't recognize that people are working hard. We get that people are working hard with very limited resources. But we also must not turn a blind eye and pretend as though we don't always end up in a situation sometimes where we have to ask ourselves, what's really going on here? Why is it that people are not doing what they are tasked with doing? And sometimes they have the tools, sometimes they have the equipment, sometimes they have the resources, and they are still not doing what they're supposed to be doing, sir. That is what I speak about in terms of us being able as a country, if you love your country, to be able to do better and to do right by this country, sir. Because at the end of the day, the experiences of the Honourable Member for St. Peter and all of the others in this chamber in relation to us making sure that we are able to not just clear, as I saw down in St. Thomas last week with the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, a bus stop cleared in the area around the bus stop, but all of the area as you lead to the bus stop and beyond is filled with bush. So nobody is having regard or care for the fact that, again, our women, our children, our elderly people have to traverse these areas, and it is no longer sufficient to just clean one area, but not actually pay attention and have the level of pride in what you are doing, that you also employ the resources to make sure that you do an entire job, sir. Many of us will not do it in our own homes. And therefore, I urge Barbadians, particularly those who are employed by the Crown and the state, to ensure that we pay attention to these things. We try to tell our young people that they must do better, that they must pay attention to these things. But we set sometimes the wrong examples because we ourselves are not ensuring that the supervisors or the supervision is being addressed properly, sir. I had reason within the last few weeks, sir, I've been on the ground because I believe that a number of the issues that my colleagues have been raising have been of great concern, certainly to them, and they've become great concern to me. It has become that recurring issue, and the general theme has been that, you know, they call the officers across the depot, they're trying to get people to come out to do certain things. People start the work, they don't come back. And unresponsiveness. And unresponsiveness not just to the members in this chamber, sir, but an unresponsiveness sometimes to the wider public as well. This is our reality. I'm not taking tales out of school. Every Bajan knows what is happening. Every tourist who comes to the island can see for themselves. Drive through St. Thomas, drive through St. Andrew. We are doing things, but we are not doing it in a systematic way that you can start to see the improvement, that you can start to see the difference within the country in the way that I believe that we can certainly do it if we pay attention to the details, sir. And I go wide in terms of my discussion because I believe that this concern is a concern in terms of what we are doing across various ministries. This is nothing to do with housing and how housing just deals with estates or how they deal with housing developments. But this is an issue of how we treat to the issue of the maintenance of the assets of government and how we ensure that the people who have responsibility for the supervision of our resources, whether human or equipment or otherwise, how are they performing to make sure that we are getting the best spend for our money, sir? That is what the discussion needs to be about. These issues have pervaded, I think, both administrations over the years. I recall being on the other side and complaining that the estates were not clean, that there were open lots. These have been there from time. But it does not mean that they must, perhaps what, let me stop for a second. What has been happening is that the newspapers will come and put something in the media and seek to highlight these problems that as MPs we all sit around in here and we talk about. And that is okay. They put people to tell the story of the things that have not been done in terms of the same lack of supervision, the same issues in terms of all of the challenges that people are having. But when the parliamentary representatives have to stand in this chamber or otherwise, or the ministers, and call out the behaviors of some, sir, it is almost as though we are not ourselves to acknowledge where the problems are. We are supposed to fix the problems, but we are not apparently supposed to be able to acknowledge that we have a problem which needs to be addressed. And I have a difficulty with that, sir, because in making comments as it relates to improving this country, I really am concerned that many of my colleagues speak at times, and the headlines are intended to sensationalize what has been said by each and every one of us. People often grab at the headlines because that is the nature of the day. Everybody wants something quick. But the truth of the matter is, sir, when you listen to what MPs have said in relation to concerns in their own communities, you get a far different picture than what is presented by the catchy headline that has grabbed your attention, that you said something about an officer, you're trying to fire people. Sir, at the end of the day, all 30 of us, we will be fired when we do not do what we have to do in the name of the people of our constituencies in this country, sir. We will be fired by the Honourable Prime Minister if in whatever way we have not fulfilled the obligations of our ministries. I therefore stand here today to say that I will call out what I see in my tenure, certainly, sir, as minister, certainly in any capacity in this government, where people are not driving a stroke in order to make sure that this country is better. And therefore, I call on all of the institutions, all of the people who are vested with the powers to oversee the persons under them, to make sure that those persons are doing an honest day's work, sir. I had the opportunity yesterday we had the issues with the flooding across the country, to watch a team, and there was my team. I can be straight, there was one of the team under my ministry. But I watched a young man take a shovel and try to clear out a drain and take all of the debris and put it on the side of the area where he was cleaning. Sir, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you have seen that happen before. And I'm standing there asking myself, what are we doing? Where has this supervision taken place to say to this young man, sir, that is not how it is done? The officer off to the side, he ain't studying what the youngster doing, because he too is not interested in what it is that we are saying in terms of giving an honest day's work, sir. Because when the heavy rains come, which they will, they are going to wash all of the debris, sir, all the way back through the drains and block up the drains and cause flooding in this country all over again. Sir, these are the realities, and I'm not going to run from the realities of what we're dealing with. We're going to try to change behavior, but as MPs, we have to talk about the issues of behavior. People say, Minister, you must be afraid of the unions because the big headlines say you're going to fire people. I didn't say I firing nobody. I say give an honest day's work. And the unions in this country must also stand by that position that people give an honest day's work. People must be treated fairly. We get that. But in the same token, we must stand shoulder to shoulder in calling on people who are employed by the state to ensure that they are also giving of their best, as the public of Barbados expects of us to also give of our best, sir. So I want to today support the resolution, indicate that we are going in the right direction in terms of making sure that we are providing the housing. I would want the National Housing Corporation and certainly the ministry to ensure that, you know, we are swift in not only the vesting of our lands, but also that we don't take forever to ensure that in even this particular project, that we take too much time to get the documentation to the hands of the contractor so that they can be able to mobilize and to start what they have to do, sir. Because we will get here and talk about 10,000 houses, but if the people who have to do the paperwork to make sure that this becomes a reality do not do what they're supposed to do, we are going to have frustrated Barbadians that we're going to have to deal with. Colleagues are going to be running to the minister and saying, Minister, what are you doing? What is the cause of the delay? If we don't get the assistance in terms of the allocation of the funds, in terms of from finance in a timely manner, because they have to do what they have to do in terms of their allocations as well, we are going to find ourselves where we are not able to deliver. And I would want to call on the Honourable Minister to have those meetings. I'm sure he's already doing it, but have those meetings with the finance team and let us make sure that the contractors who even exist and complain that they're not getting their pay, and those who we want to engage to be able to build out the additional housing stock, that we put mechanisms in place to make sure that people are paid. Too often across ministries, we have situations where monies are held up. And when monies are held up for contractors, you know what ends up happening? They have staff that they have to pay. And that staff has children that they got to send to school. They got women sometimes to support, sir. The vendors then can't get the little money to sell when they're on the various job sites from the stock that they have. These are the realities, sir. The actions of one person or a few persons has a knock-on effect on everything that this administration is trying to achieve. So while I support and I triumph the efforts being made by us to do what we know to be right, to do what we know we have to do to alleviate the problems that we have seen in this country, sir, I can only implore the officers who have responsibility to move the paper and the file from one office to the next and one desk to the next to pay attention to what it is that they are doing, because they are part of the transformation with us as well. The transformation is not pretty talk alone. The transformation means that you have to find different ways to do the things that you've done for all of the generations before you. The transformation means that sometimes you're going to have to make recommendations to change the systems, to make things better so that the paperwork in housing can go a little faster, so that it can accelerate, so that people are able to get into a house and to be comfortable, sir. Those are the things that transformation means. Transformation is not a pretty buzzword that the Barbados Labour Party came up with. We came up with it because the people of this country said to us that they wanted a change, they wanted transformation. But as much as we may want it, we equally have to make sure that the people who have the power of the mighty pen as well to act on what it is that we set forth as policy, that those persons are also doing what they are supposed to do, sir. My concern in all that we are doing, and the Honourable Minister is well aware of this, is making sure that we have the adequate number of workers to be able to execute all of the ambitious program that we have, sir. The reality, and I know the Honourable Minister of Education can speak to it as well, and has spoken to it, are issues and our challenges in relation to making sure that we have persons not just wanting to participate in the construction gateway, but also making sure that we have people who will be able, when the houses come from Guyana, the Juravilla project, or whether it is the Chinese houses, making sure that we are putting things in place and putting on alert the contractors who are going to be able to execute these projects. Because again, sir, there will be nothing more frustrating, not just for us, but also for the residents of this country, if the execution of the works are not done within the time frame when they have landed here in this country, sir. That is what our mission has to be. And again, the call is on those persons who have to make sure that the program is properly executed, to not let this be something where the container is sitting down there and works and the wood is in the container, but it isn't being put up because they haven't awarded the contract or because the monies haven't come down from finance to be able to make sure that the persons are paid, sir. Those are our realities. The intention is pure, but the intention is sometimes thwarted because there are so many other people that we have to depend on in order to get a project off of the ground. And we are all feeling it across ministries. We have taken a decision at the utilities meeting that we hold within MTW, along with all of the utility companies, and now we've joined the National Housing Corporation, to make sure that a number of these projects that are coming on stream are brought to the attention of that utilities meeting, which brings together the telecommunications providers, the Barbados Light and Power, the Barbados Water Authority in one space to discuss the upcoming developments across the country. We've added that as part of our agenda. And why, sir? Because we don't have the time to waste. We don't have time for one entity to be doing what they're doing, and then we haven't put a situation in place where we have got the mains in place and the water supply to the developments that we are building out, sir. We need to make sure that we procure what we have to in terms of the pipes, so that the Honourable Minister is not in an embarrassing position when he has developments and he then doesn't have a supply of water, or that the electrical company doesn't go in a timely manner to make sure that you don't have to keep digging up the road in order to do works that are necessary to give power to the people in these communities. We have had to break down what has been a long-standing situation where people just operate in silos. We've had to bring them together, sir, to ensure that our policies do not fail. And I can tell you, sometimes the efforts are frustrated, but by a select few. But we are determined, ministers and those of like mind, to ensure that we do not waste the resources of this country, that we do not waste the limited resources that we have, and to ensure that we are able to get the projects off of the ground and get people into these houses in a timely manner, sir. I have every confidence in the Honourable Minister that he will deliver. He's put his neck on the line, and I have no doubt that he knows what is expected of him by his colleagues, but I know that he will leave no stone unturned in being able to deliver on this, and no doubt try to surpass the amount that he has that has been identified for him to be able to accomplish, sir. Sir, I want to end on this point that I feel that we've seen over the last few weeks since we've come back to this house, we've seen the project in Bridgetown in relation to the NIS building. We have seen this resolution coming today. Sir, there are other resolutions, as the Honourable Minister has highlighted, that are also on the cards to be able to vest and to ensure that we have joint venture projects to be able to build out housing in this country. But we must never, ever run from the fact that we have a responsibility to cater for those persons at the low income bracket. And I hope that in the decisions which are made in relation to not just the Lower Burney project, but in all of the projects, that we recognize from our statistics and the data that is being gathered that there are a number of large families that are going to need to be accommodated. There are also single households that need to be accommodated. We also have to look at our elderly population and the fact that we need to ensure that they are also properly accommodated in sometimes single accommodation for them. And therefore, there must be a mixed use within these developments which takes into account the rent to own, the outright purchase, and of course, the weekly weekly contributions that people make in terms of the NHC units as well. Sir, the people who are in the Golden Rock area and a number of the persons who I know will meet the criteria are persons who I know in some cases will not be able to afford to be able sometimes to do the rent to own because they may not be making sufficient funds. An account must be taken of that in any survey that is being done and any decision making that is being done by the Ministry of Housing and the NHC in relation to these projects, sir. It is important because we do not want to raise the expectations of our people and then find that we are still not able to provide for the very people that we said we were going to provide for. So, sir, I again want to support the resolution, and I therefore crave your indulgence, perhaps in asking of this chamber. I think we're going to have to break in order to break for lunch. I believe honourable members still wish to speak. If not, the honourable member can wrap up. Right. One. All right, I think the honourable member intends to wrap up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member St. yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, let me thank the honourable members who contributed to this debate. And you know, Mr. Speaker, one thing I like about this government, persons are able to express themselves freely and once they're fair in their comments. And this morning, all the comments that I heard in this chamber, they were fair comments and passionate comments. And persons who understand where we are as a government spoke in this debate and the need for us to bring greater synergies to allow each of us in the various ministries to achieve the objectives and the policy directives as outlined by the cabinet. And we must not be afraid at all to say, once we are respectful and allow people to know what we're faced with as a government. I started off this morning by letting the people of this country know where we are, what we've been through, and it not being a bed of roses. And the fact that we don't have a war chest, and I use the word war chest because that's the word that some of my colleagues use in the engineering profession. We don't have a war chest sitting down of money waiting to execute things. So we are at this stage because we are going through a transformation, and we're definitely, I would say to the people of this country in the various ministries, we are doing our best and we can see the results. This debate though, however, created a few questions from my colleagues, which I wish to answer a few, having endorsed most of what have been said. In terms of the HIV program, I want the member for St. Thomas to know that is a very active program within the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance. And this financial year, we have allocated some $310,000 for the payment of rent for persons living with HIV and AIDS. We have also paid accommodations for some 18 persons. And while that may sound like a few, we still have to be mindful. We have also built houses in various locations, and I don't risk to mention these locations in here because we don't want persons to know where these persons are living, and it is a very serious and confidential area of governance, and we don't seek to give out information. But what I may say to you and to the public is that this government has recognized the need to provide housing, social housing for persons living with HIV, and it is a program that is being managed within the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, and it is an active program. That is as far as I would go, but I thank the member for raising it because what she did was to educate persons in this country, let them know that we started such a program as a former administration, and we are carrying on this program. Now, thank you, member. You know, there are quite a few things that were raised, and I heard the honourable member for St. Peter with respect to the whole aspect of housing and the estate. And when I looked at the allocations for this year, I see Maynard's being one of the housing estates with respect to the electrical upgrade. And member, I certainly will ensure that we carry out as we have planned and indicated in the report that should come to Cabinet next Thursday, identifying those units that have not been touched thus far and those units that are on the carriage for this year. And Maynard is one of those units, sir. So you can take back that with no level of comfort, though, because like I said, Barbadians have moved away from talk and they need action. They need to see action. And I mean, we can get in here and we can say whatever we want to say, but the action, and I'm seeing action going on in housing, and that is why I'm confident that we will execute this silent revolution project. Mariners Estate and Housing Estate, the electrical system, site visits. Mr. Speaker, as I sit here, I heard the member for St. Thomas when I was leaning over to the member for Christchurch East. We were discussing a site visit to go to look at some lands in Paris land to address under the Tenantry Freeholds Purchase Act, where persons have been living on these lands for over 5 years. Some are national housing lands, some are not national housing lands. They're not plantation lands, so that $2.50 a square foot come into play, and after the market value has been worked out, government will subsidize the other amount, whether the cost is $5, whatever, we will put the other $2.50 per square feet. So with respect to the tenantries, member for St. Thomas and the member for Christchurch East, we are actively looking at that, and we have a deadline of the end of November to see if we can cover the entire country. But it is work in progress, and I'm glad that it was raised here this morning. Maintenance of estates. You know, I sympathize with the member for St. Michael's Southeast, parliamentary representative for St. Michael's Southeast, because she had to present herself to a family that lost a loved one. And some may attribute it to negligence on our part. I wouldn't go so far. But what I can say to you, that is probably one of the toughest things, to lose someone to an area that government has responsibility for maintaining. And indeed, that was a very tough time for us as a team. Since then, and I don't want to go back to the days when estates were not being maintained, because we came into office in 2018 and we lost that person, remember? That was what year? 2018? 2018. And if you look at it, one can seek to apportion blame to this government, but being fair to ourselves, when we came into office in 2018, we had the responsibility to execute the maintenance program. And indeed, I think that's why the member is so forceful with respect to persons within the ministries doing what they have to do, because ministers come and ministers go. Governments change. We are hoping this one don't change at any time soon. But the reality is, when ministers come and ministers go, what is common are the systems that we came and found and we improved upon, and the persons who are supposed to execute the work as the systems are put in place. And maintenance is my background. I've been an engineer in a plant for years, and I understand if you don't maintain a specific piece of equipment, it will break down. And if that breaks down, it causes a ripple effect. And a country will be out of product, persons will be sent home. But we have to understand, and I support the member for St. Michael's Southeast and the member for St. Peter, that when you come to work, you have to understand whether you are a maintenance foreman, a maintenance supervisor, a minister. When you come to work, you have a country on your shoulders. You have people out there who depend on you. And it is incumbent upon you to do your best. And while I'm here standing as minister responsible for maintenance of these estates, the electrical maintenance, I give the value of money spent across the estate in terms of the sewer system, $8.82 million spent since 2018, and under the electrical upgrade, we have spent some $14.4 million. Money is being spent. And money will be spent. But at the end of the day, these systems, as the member says for St. Michael Southeast, must be maintained. And if it is one thing that I've taken away from this debate, persons are comfortable that we can execute, but persons are uncomfortable with the routine maintenance work that is being executed. And I call on my ministry and my SOE, who has full responsibility for these estates, to don't take it as destructive criticism, but use it to regroup, sit down, and let's find a way whereby we can come up with a predictive or preventative maintenance plan. Predictive may be somewhat, challenging because of the age of the estate. Some of these estates are from in the 1960s and in the 1950s. But what we can do, we can sit and come up with a preventative maintenance program, even if not predictive maintenance program, which is done for more newer equipment and more newer asset. We can come up with a preventative maintenance program and seek to bring a level of comfort, not to us in here, but to the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, there were just one or two other points raised, and the whole aspect of allocating housing to persons in the low-income bracket. When you look at the pyramid, the pyramid has the majority of the people are at the base. When you look at how a pyramid is structured, and those are the persons with less disposable income. And when we came into office back into office in 2021, we looked at clearing a backlog, 2022, sorry. We looked at clearing a backlog of applicants within national housing. That backlog was in the region of 23,000 persons who would have applied for houses over the years and received no feedback. Today I can stand, and I didn't speak on it during my initial stages, but I can say to you that we have wrapped up and have accounted for 15,000 of those persons. And as I speak to you, some officers are in the field gathering the necessary information on persons that we either can locate or we were having challenges with respect to identification. So that process, I would say, is more than 75% completed, and we have allocated at a site, the first site that we intend to build the hardwood houses on, Clifton, 10 persons. We have created that policy that has been approved. The policy has been approved by Cabinet that 45% of all persons who will be given houses, 45% must come from that backlog. Another 45% must come from within persons in the public service and in the private sector, and 10% will be persons with disability. So work is ongoing, and I thank the member for raising that, because I actually forgot to mention that in my speech. And now I am wrapping up with a level of confidence to let the people of this country know we are addressing the backlog, and we have found some 15,000 persons of that backlog. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say to you, derelict properties and vacant lots. In my first speech as Minister of Housing, I mentioned the whole point of dealing with derelict and vacant lots. We have some 35,000 derelict and vacant lot properties in this country, shared between 15 and 10,000 respectively. And I heard the member for St. Peter mention building communities, and this is the way we can do it. That's why we are focusing on these derelict and vacant lots, because these are lots that are within substantive communities. And if we can build the 4 and 5 houses that you mentioned, member for St. Peter, excellent point. That's how we build strong and vibrant communities, and we give those persons the opportunity, the grandchildren and the children and the children's children, the opportunity to own a home within these various communities. So that process is ongoing. We will soon take a paper to cabinet to come up with a policy decision on how we treat with them going forward. But recently we acquired some land at Kensington New Road, and one of the properties would have been a vacant lot. Having surveyed the 2 properties to be acquired, we found a vacant lot, and that lot has been added so you can get some additional housing. In addition, we've been seeing a number of derelict properties. Only last week I toured with the chief property manager, and it was a revelation. And if I thought I knew Barbados, I don't know Barbados, because he took me in some back roads and some nook and crannies in the St. Michael area, where we recognize a number of derelict properties that must be acquired in an effort to address the Halls Road issue, where we're doing the necessary infrastructural improvement within the Halls Road area there. So, Mr. Speaker, a lot has been happening. We still have a lot of work to do. And I endorse the comments of the members, and I say to you, this ministry is on a mission to assist this government and to assist the people of this country to deal with all of the economic woes as it relates to housing, to put people back to work, those 420 contractors that we have put back to work. And in addition, there are some other persons who, under the Construction Gateway, the initiative, will be going into work, or they have been working under the Hurricane Elsa project, and some of them will be going into the whole building of the hardwood houses as they acquire these skills. And I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that we're on track and the steering wheel is being held, and we're in control of our destiny as a government, and we're in control of building up Barbados in a meaningful and wholesome way, where our citizens have come to recognize that Barbados is one of the best places in the world to live, do business, raise family, and a place of good vibes. And with those words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged and I beg that this resolution now pass.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes are, this resolution stands passed. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I therefore beg to move the adjournment of the House until the 3rd of November at 10 a.m. 3rd of, sorry. Hold on. October, sorry, at 10 a.m. Is it 3rd? Hold on. Sorry, the 4th of October at 10 a.m. 4th? Yeah.
Yeah. The question is that this House stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 4th day of October at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes are. This House stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 4th day of October at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.